Well, hello folks. I hope you can hear me and see me okay. This is the first live stream in a couple of weeks, and we've made a few changes to settings in software. Hopefully that will improve quality, although you never know your luck the way YouTube is going, particularly with interference to the service potentially by people in Russia or the Ukraine or whatever the case may be at the moment. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima from Melbourne, and just checking on the streaming, it seems to be okay. We'll soon see it come up. There it is, looks good. Quite a few different items on the stream tonight. One of the things that I've taken some delight in doing, hopefully not upsetting anybody's copyright or whatever, is to draw attention to several ham radio YouTube channels which don't get all that much attention and deserve a great deal more. Of course, the best known in Australia for ham radio on YouTube are Peter Parker, VK3AML, and his website, YouTube publications. He does a wonderful job. Literally hundreds, possibly thousands of YouTube clips by now, after 13 years I think it's been. And Hayden down in Hobart, VK7HH. They're the two outstanding examples, and they get lots of hits. However, there are quite a few up-and-coming hams, and some both here and in New Zealand, who are deserving of a bit more attention, and I hope to draw attention to them through tonight's stream. I'll also be talking tonight about HAARP, the ionospheric research station in Alaska, run now by the University of Alaska Fairbanks, no longer in the control of the military, and the numerous conspiracy theories, some of them so outlandish that really the only way to reply to them is by putting on an engineer to talk about them, and the engineer will be going by the name of Curious Droid, who gives you the facts and the figures engineering-wise of what HAARP can and cannot do. So without any further ado, I'll just go to air. Hello, this is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, now opening on 147.475 with the usual Saturday night live stream. If you care to Google VK3AML 12 March 2022, you should be able to see as well as hear this transmission. And we're about to feature the YouTube contributions of several radio hams. And first on the list, one of the youngest of the crew, Tom DeMamiel, VK3FTOM. He seems to specialise in going out to unusual portable locations and operating from there, and does an excellent job of recording each of these and putting them up on YouTube as a sort of an attractor for other young people to get involved with the hobby, for which he can only derive a great deal of praise. The YouTube clips are of excellent quality, and I hope Tom won't mind that I'm putting on a couple tonight just to show the sort of things that Tom does. This is VK3AML with the regular Saturday night test transmission, and we'll take you over to Tom DeMamiel, VK3FTOM. Tom DeMamiel, 2 recent field trips, French Island and Listerfield Hills.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, I'm currently here at the Frankston railway station waiting for the Stony Point line so I can head down to French Island today to do an island and a parks activation. Well, that's the intent anyway. Whether I get enough contacts to claim it as a parks is a different story. But I'm not doing IOTA, I'm doing Islands of Australia, which is a different award. But yeah, so yeah, I'm currently just got a backpack full of HF gear. I've got some VHF, UHF gear. I've got pretty much everything. from DC to daylight, that I'm allowed on, that is. So yeah, hopefully it's another 37 minutes till the Stony Point line gets here, and then I'll be down on Stony Point, and then down the ferry and over to the island. I'll be back with the magic of editing. 7 Friesel, cheers, Tom, VK3AML.
I'm just going to switch over to probably listen to them broadcast on my way in because I'm about to get to a train station.
And we're watching the Stony Point train come into Frankston.
Ladies and gentlemen, just got off the train here. I'm here at Stony Point. I'll just flip the camera around and show you around. We're here at Stony Point, as you can see. That's the train line that I just got off. And if we zoom in up here, that's the ferry that I'm probably going to get over to head over to the island.
Various views of Western Port Bay.
Gentlemen, I've made it over to French Island, and yeah, I'm now on the island. So I'm going to go for a bit of a ride, find somewhere nice, set up, and try and activate this island. This track's very tight.
Just noticed, yeah. Okay, I'm on my own today, so I'll catch you after the rollover. 73.
Park to park.
Park to park, go.
VK3AML portable, French Island.
FT, what was it?
Yeah, Fox Tango Oscar Mike, VK3AML portable.
Yeah, 5 and 1, not real strong, but I got you in there, over.
Yeah, thank you for the 51. Can I grab your park number and I'll give you mine on the next transmission?
Yeah, 1304 is the park, over.
Yeah, thank you for the 1304. Signal VK3AML portable.
Yeah, g'day, VK3AML portable, I think on French Island, VK3GA. Yeah, g'day Tom, name here is Graham, and you're both 5 and 5.
The information on the next over, VK3 Oscar Victor, sorry mate, you're going to have to give me the call sign again, from VK3AML portable.
Okay, VK3AML, VK2, number 2, Oscar Victor Alpha. And your report, about 4x3 got you in there, low noise here, it's very good conditions here. Name this way is Gary, Golf Alpha Romeo Yankee, over.
Yeah, QSL Gary, QSL, I'm just double checking the call sign, It's VK number 2, Oscar Victor Alpha, VK2 Oscar Victor Alpha, is that a QSL?
QSL, good as gold. Got your information off the Parks and Peaks app, so you don't need to transmit all the park details. I'll log it all off the phone, over.
Yeah, QSL. Well, thank you there, Gary. Thank you, and good to get you here. And it's good to see you're working French Island. Anyway, 7 trees. Cheers.
70 trees. Good luck, eh? I've been on French Island a couple of times. Used to live down that way. Haven't been back in a long time. We're up in central New South Wales this way. Have a good day. Good luck, over.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. 7 trees. QRZ Island/Parks. VK3AML portable.
Alpha November Alpha.
NVK3AML.
Yeah, no worries, mate. I'll get you to repeat the signal report, my signal report.
Yeah, 5 and 1, 51.
QSL, mate. Thanks for that. 7344.
7 trees. QRZ, please. VK3AML portable. Victor, VK5 Alpha Victor. Is that QSL?
VK3FTOM, VK5 Alpha Victor. Just stand by, I am in a park as well. I am VKFF1697. VKFF1697, over.
And now,
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm out here on the bike, going up to Listerfield Trig Point to do a bit of amateur radio this morning. And yeah, so I've got the antennas on the pack, and I've got some HF gear, and I've got some VHF, UHF gear. Anyway, I was riding along to my destination, and this down here is normally, I've seen cows and stuff grazing down here, and I've seen people walking. But it's been very, very wet and rainy, and I'm hoping I'll get home before the weather turns today. But this is how flooded everything is. Everything's flooded. There's a bike track which normally runs down there, and now look at it. It's just water. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, I'm out into Listerfield this morning. In previous videos, I've had silly people say, you can't ride on the footpath here. It's illegal in Victoria if you're over 12. Well, this here is a bike track. You can see the markings on the floor here, so I don't want any of those sort of comments, please. Keep those thoughts to yourself, because this is a designated bike path.
And we're looking over the top of the handlebars of Tom's bike at the moment.
Hey guys, sorry about the WIA news going on in the background, but I'm here at the start of the park. No motorcycles, no dogs. We're lucky I'm on a push bike. And yeah, this is the start of the park, so I'm going to head on in.
Moving into Churchill National Park. This is VK3AML with a regular Saturday night test. If you want to see the video, Google VK3AML 12 March 2022. That's VK3AML 12 March 2022 on YouTube Livestream. Currently VK3FTOM clip on.
Quite complicated, but yeah, I talked with the on the IPD class license, and not just 122.5. I understand Andrew has given a talk on 122.5 before, I think, and demonstrated he had some.
I'm pushing about 5 from a handheld.
Oh, you're doing well. You're doing well. They're still rabbiting on REC about class licensing.
And microwaves.
Tom's making his way to the lookout at the Listerfield Hills.
Guys, it's me, Tom, VK3AML. As you can tell, I made it to the trig point. Got the handheld here, and I'm going to try some Simplex FM, because here I don't like. If it stops spitting, I'll get the 817 out. But I really want to try avoid getting that wet. I think this has some sort of IP rating, so I'm not as concerned about that. But yeah, if it settles down, I will get the 817 out. If not, it will just be an FM Simplex day. Anyway, I'll try HF if the weather improves. CQ on 2 metres, CQ on 2 metres, CQ on 2 metres. This is VK3FTOM portable, Listerfield trig point calling and listening. FTOM portable, 5 and 9 on to Listerfield trig point.
It's VK3 Alpha Charlie Romeo. I was just listening to the broadcast and heard you come up. Fox Charlie Oscar Mike, I think your call sign was, and you're portable at Listerfield. And very, very strong signal into Sunbury. The name is Ray, over.
Yeah, QSL Ray, QSL on Sunbury. That's what, a good 40 plus 50 k's from here. And the call sign is Fox Tango Oscar Mike. Fox Tango Oscar Mike. FTOM. FTOM. Tom.
Yeah, F Tom. Yeah, very good. And what's your name?
Name's Tom, Ray. Name's Tom.
I should have guessed that, I guess. Anyway, it's a wet, cold morning. That was summer. It's gone, I think. VK3FTOM portable, VK3ACR.
Yeah, VK3ACR, VK3FTOM returning. Yeah, QSL there, buddy. QSL. It's a bit wet and rainy and disgusting, but it is what it is. It's not dreadful. It's not bucketing down, but it is spitting up on the summit here. And stay safe. VK3ATR, VK3FTOM portable. I'm glad to see I'm making to Sunbury. 7 for each. Cheers.
Cheers.
Are you anyway, portable? So you sort of side onto the beam, so you're very strong. It must be an excellent location. Anyway, I'm in the middle of wiring up some stuff here, but I did hear you call. VK3TOM, and I know who you are. VK3BFG.
Yeah, just correction, Peter. I've still got the F call, so it's FTOM. But yeah, thanks for coming back to the call there, Peter. Have a good day and enjoy wiring. VK3BFG, VK3FTOM portable.
Roger. QSL, VK3, Foxtrot, Tango, Oscar, Mike. How's that one?
Bang on. 7 threes. Cheers, Peter. Still spitting, but the spitting's reduced, so I might get out the HF gear and throw up a dipole and get on 40. But good to see 70 centimetres simplex. People are monitoring the frequencies, and also 2 metres simplex. So yeah, so I think I'll be doing everything from UHF down to the bottom end of HF today. But yeah, anyway, having fun. 40 metres AM. This is 40 metres AM.
Gosh, I think they say 6 kilohertz, but when you listen to it on an AM broadcast, I thought it sounded like 6. It sounds like 2. You know, it's very narrow. So just keep that in mind too. I don't have the 7700 turned on, which has got definitely a wider skirt. There's a narrow skirt on this filter. This crystal filter somehow is why it sounds very narrow. Anyway, I wonder how the signals are. Got a great solar flux and lots of refraction happening, so I guess the signals are up there, but solar storm fighting us there too. VK3ATC, VK5QD.
VK3FT.
Foxtrot, Tokyo, Ocean, Mexico, portable, QSL.
QSL.
Bit of wind here.
Good afternoon there, Tim.
This is what happens when you do a video with wind blowing.
I'm wondering where portable you are. Back to you.
I did try to filter that, but without much success, I must say. VK3AML with a regular Saturday night test transmission.
Roger, Tom. You're about a 4 by 3 on that last over, but you were very, very weak just before. Very, very weak just before. You were 3 by 3 when you first came in. 3 by 3 when you first came in, but you come up to a 4 by 7. A 4 by 7 on the last over. Are you QRP right now? Low power QSL?
Yes, QSL 5 watts.
This is what happens when you try to record a QSO in a 40 knot gale on top of a hill at Listerfield.
Roger, Tom. Thank you very much for the contact there, mate. Thank you very much for the contact there. We will catch you later down the log. Victoria, kilowatt 3, Foxtrot, Tokyo, Ocean, Mexico. This is Victor India 2022, Papa, Radio, India, Delta, Echo, 73. Thank you for the contact, Tom. Bye-bye.
7 threes, Tim. VK3FTRM is clear. 7 threes, cheers. VK3FTRM portable.
VK3 Fox Charlie Oscar Mike.
Negative. Fox Tango Oscar Mike portable. Fox Tango Oscar Mike portable.
VK3 Fox Tango Oscar Mike portable. Sorry, Tom. Didn't get it the first couple of times. You're at 5 and 3, 53 into the silo near Pakenham, over.
Yeah, thank you for the 53. You're 5 and 8, 58 onto Listerfield trig point. 58 Listerfield trig point.
Yeah, no worries. Is that the one up near the quarry, over?
Yeah, QSL.
Yeah, no worries. It's somewhere near the
This is on 15 metres.
Coming up that way somewhere too, as well, over.
Yeah, QSL. I'll look that up when I get home. Thanks there, Peter, and hope your activation goes well. VK3ZPF, VK3FT, over.
Yeah, no worries, Tom. Good to get you to log in, mate, and hope it goes well for you. Try and stay dry.
7 threes, cheers.
Level kill, JF3, YVK, you are that?
VK3FTRM portable. VK3.
Thank you. 7-3's QRZ. Whiskey 6, Quebec uniform 59400.
This is on 28482.
QRZ, Victor kilowatt 3 X-ray. CQ contest, CQ, Victor kilowatt 3 X-ray. Kilo Alpha 3 Fox Zulu November 59400. Thanks to PA 73 QRZ.
Alpha Zulu, Good luck. Thank you. November 7, Radio Quebec. Contact November 7, Radio Quebec.
Alpha Victor QRZ.
VK3AML.
And so Tom comes down from the Listerfield lookout on his bike, shooting a video while driving. I'm not quite sure how legal that is, but anyway, Tom, good on you. Tom DeMamiel, VK3AML, is one of Victoria's youngest radio hams. Got his licence a couple of years ago at the age of, I think, 14 or 15. He's now 17 and has his own VK3AML Ham Radio and Life, it's called, YouTube channel, which I can thoroughly recommend, particularly for young people who are a bit more energetic than us oldies and can take bicycles out to wild paths and navigate them without falling off, although I believe on French Island Tom actually did fall off on one occasion. Okay, this is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima with the regular Saturday night test transmission and concurrent YouTube video live stream. If you Google VK3AML 12 March 2022, you should get this live stream with the video component. Moving on to the next subject now, perhaps the most contentious subject of the night, but one that'll be of interest to any ham radio operator who's operated on HF, and that is the HAARP, H-A-A-R-P, ionospheric station, ionospheric research station in Alaska, which is currently run by the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Used to be a military facility. Now it's been handed over purely for research and is only sporadically operated. But this is a research project that grew out of scatter radar, as it was called, scatter ionospheric radar, in the 1960s, the early 1960s. And if you know where to go on the net, there's a very interesting documentary, of which I'll show you parts in the next few minutes, on scatter radar, and you can see how the design of the HAARP system evolved from scatter radar and ionospheric prediction. Ionospheric prediction was very necessary, particularly in the days of when international shortwave broadcasting by national broadcasters was the go, to know which parts of the ionosphere were working and which frequencies were working through from one part of the world to the other was something that was very necessary to investigate from a commercial point of view. So ionospheric sounding, the checking of the ionospheric layers above the Earth, the charged particle layers that reflect radio waves back down to the Earth at great distances, was necessary. It was only later that people were investigating exciting the ionosphere to see if the reflection could be enhanced by the application of radio beams, and that's where HAARP came in. Now, there have been all sorts of ridiculous, honestly, completely silly, what would you call them, conspiracy theories surrounding HAARP, up to and including the idea that it can control weather or tidal waves or tidal surges, and even can produce a death ray on people, or that it works on low frequency audio waves, not radio waves. It's all bull, and it really takes an engineering person to sort the facts and the figures from the rubbish. So there is an engineer who calls himself on the net Curious Droid, who actually does a big debunking of all the possible things that HAARP can do and show exactly what HAARP does. So I'll switch, hang on, no, getting used to a new system, pardon me, I'll switch over to show you first of all a documentary on what they called scatter radar in the early 1960s, and then you'll see the way HAARP developed from that. Scatter radar was largely done at the geomagnetic equator. Peru, actually, initially, as you'll see in this 1963 film. And then they shifted the research to the geomagnetic pole area, hence Alaska. The magnetic North Pole. Without any further ado, let's look in on the development and the history of the engineering side of HAARP ionospheric research.
The world, our planet Earth, revolves endlessly in space. Man, searching for knowledge, directs his studies increasingly toward the space around the Earth, toward the solar system and the universe. He uses sensitive radio instruments to listen to faint signals coming from distant sources in the universe. He uses delicate optical instruments to study the sun. Yet with all this reach into space, one of the most difficult research problems encountered by scientists is the study and measurement of the upper atmosphere surrounding the Earth. The problem begins at a height of 300 kilometers, about 185 miles, in the region called the ionosphere, and extends to great heights approaching interplanetary space. Here, we see how the ionosphere can reflect radio waves. This characteristic helps long-distance communications, but it hinders the use of radio techniques to study atmospheric constituents above the ionosphere. Rockets and satellites help significantly. Satellites can detect and measure constituents of the outer atmosphere and even the exosphere, as the region beyond is called. Explorer 1 and Pioneer 3 discovered the Van Allen radiation belts. This is an artist's conception of the Van Allen belts. These vast regions above the Earth's ionosphere are composed of trapped electrons and protons. It is true that observations made by satellites have permitted scientists to cross a new threshold into space research. But orbiting satellites and expensive specialized rockets can provide only snapshot observations of the ionosphere. They cannot give us details for a specific geographic location. Continuous observations above the ionosphere for a fixed location are needed. This film is the story of how scientists at the National Bureau of Standards, U.S. Department of Commerce, tackled the problem and developed a new research technique using scatter radar for space research from the ground. It is the story of a search for a location, of building an observatory and an entire research facility. And lastly, it is a heartening story of international cooperation on a person-to-person basis. Let's look at the ionosphere again to understand the problem better. The ionosphere is composed of neutral constituents, ionized constituents, and free electrons. It is the radio properties of the regions of free electrons that permit long-distance radio communication in the so-called shortwave bands. Up to frequencies of about 30 megacycles per second, free electrons reflect radio frequency energy back toward the Earth. But at frequencies above about 30 megacycles per second, the radio waves penetrate the ionosphere. For years, scientists have used the ionoson, such as this model C4, to measure electron density variations. But its use is limited to the denser regions of the atmosphere, such as the F layer at 300 kilometers. Here, there may be up to several thousand electrons per cubic millimeter, or millions per cubic centimeter. But beyond this range, the density of free electrons decreases. Scientists wanted to know how far above the F layer free electrons extended. The problem was to devise a way to measure them. Here we see two atoms of oxygen. An electron detaches from one of them. When detached, it is a free electron and can respond to electric forces imposed upon it. When a radio wave passes by, the electron oscillates with the wave and re-radiates or scatters its energy incoherently in all directions. The problem is to excite these electrons sufficiently so that they will re-radiate enough energy to be detected from the ground. What is needed is an exceptionally powerful transmitter, an extremely large antenna, and a very sensitive receiver. Here are the Boulder, Colorado laboratories of the National Bureau of Standards. One of these, the Central Radio Propagation Laboratory, conducts basic research in the Earth's ionosphere and upper atmosphere and in space. To Dr. Kenneth Bowles, a physicist with the Boulder Laboratories, goes the credit for solving the problem. Here he confers with a colleague. Acting on a suggestion by Dr. W.E. Gordon of Cornell University, Dr. Bowles employed a technique using the incoherent scatter of radio waves by electrons in the ionosphere. This transmits a powerful pulsed radio signal in a narrow beam. The beam penetrates the ionosphere and excites free electrons in the area above. They scatter a weak signal. The extremely sensitive antenna, now acting as a receiver, detects the faint scattered signal which comes back to Earth. The system can detect faint echoes from electron densities as low as 100 per cubic centimeter, such as exist well above the F layer of the ionosphere. Under Dr. Bowles' scientific leadership, the new technique using scatter radar was successfully demonstrated at a field site in 1959. Here, near Havana, Illinois, is a portion of the original antenna used in that pioneer experiment. A breakthrough of great importance had been achieved, promising to make upper atmosphere and space research possible from the ground. The Bureau gave full support to plans to exploit the technique. First, a site was needed where the fullest range of observations and measurements could be made, including studies of the chemical composition of the upper atmosphere. They would be of greatest interest if made near the magnetic equator, where the lines of force of the Earth's magnetic field are nearly horizontal, giving the electron unusual characteristics. The pulsed radar signals could then travel perpendicularly to these lines of force and excite free electrons. This would allow us to observe the gyrations of those excited electrons, determine the characteristic frequency of the ions controlling these movements, and identify the chemical composition of atmospheric gases.
I'll just stop the film at that stage to say this is VK3AML testing with the regular Saturday night transmission, and this is currently a documentary on scatter radar from which HAARP, the ionospheric research station in Alaska, was developed, and this particular station was built in Peru, as you'll see in a moment. If you care to Google VK3AML 12 March 2022 into the internet, you should be able to see the video side of what we're transmitting in audio on 147.475. This is VK3AML testing. Now back to the film.
Certain of the gases, such as nitrogen and oxygen, dominate in lower regions. At greater heights, regions of oxygen, helium, and hydrogen dominate. With scatter radar, we can learn the heights of these various regions of gases and study the total composition of the atmosphere. Where could an ideal site be found? It should be on the magnetic equator, but as close as possible to the United States to shorten travel and shipping time. These requirements narrowed the choice to South America, and we decided to examine Lima, Peru. Here in this arid valley, only 17 miles from Lima, is the broad, flat plain we need, with enough space for our enormous antenna. Thus, our search came to an end. We found an ideal location, the Quebrada de Jicamarca. Work was started. Earlier, a treaty had been signed between Peru and the United States, naming the Instituto Geofísico del Peru and the National Bureau Standards as parties. Now, in August 1960, the site is prepared for construction. When the antenna is finished, more than 9,000 posts will have been set, covering a 22-acre field. The Peruvian workers proved they could learn quickly. They were soon performing these jobs skillfully. The inserts here being assembled permit the inside of each radiating element to be used as a piece of coaxial transmission line. In this way, the entire antenna is interconnected. Firm working schedules push construction along rapidly. The Peruvians not only contribute good workmanship, but each worker seems to realize the importance of the project. During the peak construction period, over 200 Peruvians were employed here. This provided an important boost to the local economy. At Jicamarca, the building is ready, a half-acre under one roof. Here is housed the huge transmitter supplied with electric power from nearby Lima. Dozens of skilled Peruvian engineers and technicians work on the project. Some are employees of the Instituto Geofísico del Peru. Others are university students from Lima, getting practical experience in electrical engineering. Peruvian and Bureau scientists and engineers work together, assembling and installing the many systems and components. To continue this international cooperation, other Peruvians with potential technical skills are being trained by Bureau engineers. In regular classes conducted in Spanish, they are taught basic electronics and mathematics. Many of these men, being trained as engineering aides and technicians, will work at the observatory, staffing the 3 8-hour shifts for continuous operation, including operation of the observatory's huge transformers seen here. Weighing up to 27 tons and standing 15 feet tall, these transformers deliver 3,750 kilowatts of electrical power to the transmitter system. Now we go to the large room housing the condenser bank. Here, 12-foot tall banks of capacitors stretch for 60 feet. These Peruvian workers are making a final wiring check on the powerful electrical equipment the observatory will need for probing above the ionosphere. These capacitors form a bank having a capacitance of 1,000 microfarads. This bank can be discharged in a powerful electrical pulse rated up to 20,000 joules. In the amplifier room, these electrical pulses are converted into radio frequency power. Each of the 4 amplifiers used in the transmitter was manufactured in the instrument shops of the Bureau. Each amplifier houses a transmitter tube capable of producing over 1 million watts of radio frequency power. The 4 amplifier system is designed to produce 6 million watts of radio frequency power. This maze of pumps, filters, and piping is the water purification and cooling system. It circulates demineralized water through the amplifier assembly. This dissipates the large amount of heat radiated by the transmitter tubes. Heat exchangers cool the water for recirculation. A network of tunnels runs beneath the building. Blowers circulate cool air throughout the passageways. These tunnels contain over 70 miles of cables and plumbing, interconnecting the transmitter components. Cables and coaxial piping enter the equipment rooms through floor vents. Engineers in the control room direct the transmitter energy into the antenna. Here they are seen monitoring every function of the system's operation. Coaxial aluminum piping, made of irrigation pipe, conducts the transmitted and received radio signals through a spark gap and mixer system. This automatically switches the antenna from transmitting mode to receiving mode in millionths of a second. The energy for the radio signal flows through the coaxial piping in these trenches, continuing to the midpoint of the antenna. Each quarter of the antenna is fed separately. Distribution is made to each module. A modular section comprises 1/64th of the antenna. Each module contains 144 antenna dipoles, or 288 dipoles per module. Open wire lines of 1-inch aluminum tubing connect 2 rows of 12 elements each to the central feed point of the module. Power is distributed to the individual radiating elements. This system of feeding permits unique flexibility in use of the antenna and gives it great sensitivity in receiving very weak signals from great heights above the ionosphere. Even with the antenna only partially completed, Dr. Bowles and his staff were able to initiate scientific observations. Here, Dr. Bowles, working in the screen room, is making measurements of electron densities out to 1,200 kilometers. He is using a 160,000 watt transmitter, representing only a small part of the observatory's ultimate 6 million watt capability. Radio stars, previously not known to exist, were already being observed, and other findings of great scientific significance were being made before the system was complete. Here is the trace of electron densities in the 1,200 kilometer range that Dr. Bowles has just recorded. As said earlier, scientists believe that free electrons extend to great heights above the Earth's ionosphere. Early measurements at the Hikamarka Observatory confirmed this belief. Even within the first year of observations, free electrons were detected at well above 5,000 kilometers. Other research will be added. Already, preliminary studies of the planet Venus have been made. Soon it may be possible to detect and measure clouds of solar gas driving toward the Earth, and to study the energy balance between the Earth and upper atmosphere, an important factor in our weather and meteorology. The Instituto Geofísico del Peru and the National Bureau of Standards are partners in what are indeed some of the most exciting radio research experiments of our time, searching for knowledge about the Earth's upper atmosphere, interplanetary space, and the universe, with scatter radar, and important new technique for space research from the ground.
Well, so much for I'll just bring on the camera for a moment. So much for the lead up to HAARP with that scatter radar research in the 60s. Then, of course, there was the military involvement with HAARP, and of course lots and lots of conspiracy theories. Eventually HAARP was taken over, I think about 2016, by the University of Alaska, Fairbanks, as a research facility, and this video was made by the University of Alaska after the takeover.
You heat up the ionosphere for a few minutes and then you shut it off and you watch the ionosphere repair itself. It does that in a few seconds. You can do a lot of experiments that way, things you can't do in the laboratory.
First time I visited HAARP, I didn't even know what it was. I went to HAARP as part of a physics club, the Society of Physics Students. I was a student here at the University of Alaska, Fairbanks, and HAARP at the time held an annual open house event where the public could tour the facility and talk to the scientists.
HAARP is a facility to study the ionosphere region. 60 miles out into space. And that's a region where there's not much density. The air is very thin, mostly plasma, which means electrons and ions.
When I saw this facility and saw how unique and interesting it was, so when I decided to do my PhD thesis research using the HAARP facility itself. HAARP stands for the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program.
The federal government spent about $300 million. It's the most exquisite of its kind in the world. It's currently owned and operated by the Air Force Research Lab. And they have other priorities. They've done some tests over the years. Now they want to go do other things. So it's become a bit of an orphan sitting down there in Kokona. The U.S. has the lead in the world in this area. It would be a shame to give that up. The other facilities aren't nearly as flexible or as powerful. And HAARP can do science that the other two can't. There's a chart that shows, it compares all the heaters, including air receiver. You can see that it's quite a bit more powerful and more flexible.
It's an instrument that allows us to make small changes to the ionosphere, and then we can measure the response of the ionosphere in the upper atmosphere to the changes that HAARP is making. Scientists have categorized the various layers of the atmosphere. Most of the weather that we experience occurs in the troposphere. When we fly in commercial aircraft, we're generally flying at the top of the troposphere. Above that is the stratosphere, and above that is the mesosphere, and above that is the thermosphere. And the ionosphere is basically part of the thermosphere, which extends from about 80 to 100 kilometers altitude all the way up to about 1,000 kilometers altitude. And so the ionosphere is generally what we refer to as the partially ionized portion of the thermosphere. It's too high for weather balloons, and it's too low for many satellites. And sure, we can launch rockets through the ionosphere too, as we do at Poker Flat, but those are very fast but expensive experiments. The reason why we care about the ionosphere, particularly for radio communication, is that radio waves, when traveling through free space, behave differently when they travel through a region of charged particles or plasma. The ionosphere is basically a partially ionized plasma, and so one of the things that can happen to radio waves that travel through a plasma is that they can be bent, their polarization can change, they can be absorbed. And since so much of our lives is really dependent on radio communication, either communicating to satellites or for navigation with GPS, which is also communicating with satellites essentially, or over-the-horizon communication or over-the-horizon radar, it's really important for us to understand how radio waves are affected by the ionosphere, and in some cases how radio waves affect the ionosphere in the case of HAARP or other powerful radio transmitters.
A lot of us realize how important it is, how powerful, how significant the facility is. So we're trying to figure out ways to keep it alive as an active scientific tool.
Why would it be beneficial? I can't speak for the applications, but it's a mystery to solve. We can think of the ionosphere as a natural plasma laboratory, the conditions of which are difficult to replicate in an actual physical laboratory. And so this is just another way of learning about the world around us.
Because if the Air Force shuts it down, by prior agreement, they're required to remediate it, which means they have to go back and turn the land back into the way it was before they started. They'll have to bulldoze the whole site away.
And that was a film on HAARP made by the University of Alaska Fairbanks, now used as a research facility. Now, of course, HAARP has attracted all sorts of conspiracy theories, and these are dealt with from an engineering point of view by a blogger, a very good blogger whose channel is worth looking at. He calls himself Curious Droid, CURIOUSDROID, and you're about to see him demolish one conspiracy theory about HAARP after another. The image that you're looking at, if you're looking in on the live stream at the moment, is the HAARP antenna. It's not all that big. We're not talking about something that's big enough and powerful enough to influence any weather, let alone weathers in other continents. But let's have a look at this documentary made by Curious Droid, where he explains further about HAARP. Now, if you're listening to me on 147.475, you can get the video associated with this by Googling VK3AML 12 March 2022. That's VK3AML 12 March 2022. Back to the documentary by Curious Droid, and I thoroughly recommend that you should have a look at the other scientific and technical material on his channel.
The controversial science project's the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, or HAARP, is right up there with the moon landings and chemtrails on the conspiracy hit list. But once you get past the wilder theories and claims, the basis of the science and its aims is no less intriguing. So just what is HAARP and why is it so controversial? Some of the many reasons why HAARP attracts so much attention comes from the claims of scientifically uninformed theorists that say it can control the weather, set off earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, bring down missiles and planes, disrupt worldwide communications and influence people's minds and moods. If that were true, then it would be one of, if not the most powerful pieces of technology on the planet and hidden behind government and military secrecy. Yet HAARP is unclassified, though it was funded and jointly managed by the US Air Force, US Navy and DARPA. But due to budget cuts in 2014, the ownership of the site and all the equipment was transferred to the University of Alaska Fairbanks, who now also run it. So what is the purpose of HAARP? Well, its basic remit is to study the ionosphere, its interaction with space weather and how it affects radio communications here on Earth, as well as the generation of VLF, that's very low frequency, and ELF, extremely low frequency radio waves, which can travel around the world and penetrate deep under the sea for communications with submarines and into the ground to reveal underground structures. HAARP deals with some complex science, and how it operates is equally complex, but the basic principle is to try and replicate how the sun affects the upper atmosphere to create the ionosphere and how it then goes on to affect it, but to do this in a controlled, repeatable way, and of course on a much smaller scale. Now, in order to understand HAARP, we need to know a little about the ionosphere. This is a constantly changing area of the Earth's upper atmosphere that reaches from about 60 kilometers to 1,000 kilometers in altitude, where it's thin enough so that the sun's ultraviolet and X-rays can reach it, but thick enough so that it can absorb these rays and ionize the gases there. It's also well above the area called the troposphere, where we live. Ionization is the process where high-energy radiation strips away an electron from a neutral atom or molecule and creates a negatively charged electron and a positively charged ion. That's an atom with a missing electron. This process creates a shell of these charged particles around the Earth, which we call the ionosphere. This stripping of the electrons also releases energy in the form of heat and light. This light is called air glow and is similar to how the auroral lights are formed in the polar regions, but it also makes the night sky everywhere glow very slightly, and you can see this on a dark, clear night with a sensitive camera and sometimes by eye. Normally, in the dense atmosphere near the surface of the Earth, the negative electrons and positive ions would recombine very quickly. But because the gas in the upper atmosphere is much less dense, the particles are much farther apart and remain separated for much longer. With all these free electrons floating around, the high atmosphere becomes conductive, starting at around 60 kilometers, peaking intensity at 300 kilometers, and then by the time it gets to 1,000 kilometers, it's dropped almost to nothing, where the atmosphere becomes too thin and then the vacuum of space takes over. In fact, the ionosphere separates into 3 layers called the D, E and F layer, with D being at the lowest altitude rising up to F at the highest altitude. Because these layers are conductive, they interact with electromagnetic waves like radio broadcasts from the surface. Depending upon their frequency, some radio waves will be absorbed, some will bounce off the electron layer and be reflected, and some will pass right through with little resistance. As these layers are created by the sun's energy, they can change dramatically from day to night, summer to winter, and in fact the lowest D layer only exists in the daytime and completely disappears at night. They're also affected by high solar activity and solar flares, and thus affect radio transmission similarly. HAARP uses up to 3.6 megawatts of high-frequency radio signals in the 2 to 10 megahertz range to excite and heat the gas molecules in a small area of the ionosphere directly above the facility. It does this with the main instrument, the IRI, or the Ionospheric Research Instrument. This is the heater. It's a phased array radio transmitter with 180 antennae in a grid covering about 100,000 square meters, or about 24 acres. This array works like one large transmitter, but it can electronically steer the beam over about a 30-degree angle. By the time the signal has reached the ionosphere, it's spread out to a size of between 60 to 100 kilometers across, depending upon its frequency and configuration. By rapidly steering the beam around this small patch of sky, it can modulate the heating process to create signals like VLF and ELF waves. Among the many misconceptions about HAARP, probably the biggest is its power output, as this is seen as undeniable proof that it is capable of doing all the wild things claimed of it. Its stated maximum power is 3.6 megawatts, but this is often mistaken for another much larger figure, its ERP output, and that can be up to 5.8 gigawatts. So why are there two wildly different figures for the same facility? Well, HAARP's output is 3.6 megawatts, but in the broadcast industry there is another figure called ERP, or effective radiated power, and here is where people get confused between actual power and ERP, because they don't understand what ERP represents. But one thing is for sure, you can't put in 3.6 megawatts and get out 5.8 gigawatts as some claim. It's just physically impossible. In fact, you can't get out a single microwatt more than you put in. If you did, then A, you've just solved all the world's energy needs by creating a machine that makes more energy than it uses, and B, you've just broke the law of physics, and in particular the law of conservation of energy. HAARP has to focus its 3.6 megawatts onto a small area of sky hundreds of kilometers above using its antenna array, like a torch focuses its light into a tight beam. That 5.8 gigawatt ERP is a fictional figure used by engineers in the broadcast industry to indicate how powerful the transmitter would have to be if there was no focusing and the whole sky was covered to the same power intensity at the target distance, which in this case is the small patch of sky 300 kilometers above HAARP. That ERP figure can change dramatically from tens of megawatts to gigawatts, depending upon how efficient the antenna is deemed to be at focusing the radio transmissions. The tighter, more focused the beam, the higher the ERP figure will be. The more spread out, the lower the ERP figure will be. But at the end of the day, the most HAARP can transmit is 3.6 megawatts. With the inefficiencies in the system, the divergence of the beam and the absorption of the atmosphere, by the time it gets to the ionosphere, it's down to 36 milliwatts, or 36 thousandths of a watt per square metre of sky in the target zone. The amount of energy from the sun falling on the same square metre of sky by comparison is 1,367 watts, about 37,000 times more energy than HAARP. As one scientist put it, it's like trying to heat the Yukon River with a domestic immersion heater. But in case you think I'm just making it all up, consider this. If that 5.8 gigawatts was real, where does the power come from? 5.8 gigawatts of electricity is far more than the whole of Alaska generates, and is enough to supply 4.6 million US households, assuming each house is using an average of 1.26 kilowatts, as stated by the US Energy Information Administration. That's the equivalent of New York, Los Angeles and Las Vegas combined. The biggest non-hydroelectric power station in the US is the Palo Verde nuclear plant in Arizona at 3.9 gigawatts, and that would still be short by nearly 2 gigawatts. So where is the massive power station near HAARP and the transmission infrastructure required to supply this fictional 5.8 gigawatts? it doesn't exist. In fact, HAARP's power actually comes from 5 2.5 megawatt diesel generators on the site. So if the power output is one of the biggest misconceptions about HAARP, the other comes from its history, and in particular, a patent filed by the physicist Bernard J. Eastland. To find out why, you have to go back to an area of Alaska before HAARP was constructed and to the oil and gas company Atlantic Richfield, also known as ARCO, and Bernard Eastland. ARCO had the rights to the huge natural gas fields in Alaska's North Slope region, but they were far from their main customers, and the cost of liquefying and transporting the gas was prohibitive. What they needed was a customer that would be nearby. Bernard Eastland was an MIT-trained physicist who'd worked at the US Atomic Energy Commission during the 1960s and 70s. He specialised in plasma physics and co-developed the fusion torch, a method of using high-temperature plasma of a nuclear fusion reactor to convert waste materials into reusable elements. In the 1980s, Eastland was working for ARCO and became the president of ARCO's Production Technologies International Company in Houston. He suggested that ARCO could use the natural gas reserves to power a huge antenna complex to focus high-energy radio beams into the ionosphere. This would heat up the gas atoms to create artificial plasma layers in the ionosphere, but in a way which could be controlled, moved and shaped by equipment on the ground. Alaska would be in a good position because the Earth's magnetic field lines go up almost vertically in that area. Each antenna would create a circularly polarized radio beam that would spin the particles around the magnetic field lines at the resonant frequency of the ions in the same way that a cyclotron works to accelerate particles. This would heat up the plasma and allow it to move along the magnetic field lines to higher altitudes. Eastland was granted a US patent, number 4686605, for the invention titled Method and Apparatus for Altering a Region in the Earth's Atmosphere, Ionosphere and/or Magnetosphere on August the 11th, 1987. Now, whilst Eastland filed the patent, he did so whilst working for ARCO, and as such, ARCO owned the patent. Sometime afterwards, Eastland disassociated himself from it and ARCO and set up his own research company. Eastland's patent makes some very interesting, if not technical reading, and some extraordinary claims. Some of the claims include that it could disrupt communications both around the Earth, but also to and from satellites, missiles, and air and sea craft by randomly modulating areas of the ionosphere which are relied upon to propagate radio signals around the Earth, and thus effectively scramble the signals. Now, back in the late 1950s and early 60s, the US and Soviets exploded nuclear weapons in the magnetosphere high above the Earth. We also have a video on that if you want to see it. This created large amounts of charged particles which were found to travel along the magnetic field lines in a spiral motion and bounce back and forth between the mirror points at their ends at very high speed. This created a lot of radio noise that could blind radar systems and was thought at the time could cause the electronics of nuclear missiles to fail. One of the patent claims was that a plasma layer could be created and used to trap some of the plasma particles, which would then oscillate between the new layer and the mirror points on the magnetic field lines to create interference that could have a similar effect to the nuclear tests, but without having to detonate a nuclear device in space. Other uses include heating large areas of the ionosphere to move them to much higher altitudes, to create unexpected and unplanned drag forces on missiles and satellites and cause them to become unstable in their travel. Also, weather modification, by affecting the upper atmospheric wind patterns by stacking of different shaped plumes of particles to create a lens effect, and then concentrating solar energy over an area or altering the course of a jet stream to move adverse weather like hurricanes or denying rain to drought-prone areas. It was also claimed to be able to make a wave reflector in the sky to steer ELF signals to a depth of 1 kilometre or more. The reflections would then be picked up by a satellite and after processing could reveal hidden structures, a bit like a CAT scan of the Earth. Another reason to use ELF waves is that the frequency of brain waves in humans lays in the 3 to 12 Hz range, very similar to that of ELF signals. It was suggested that directing such a frequency at an enemy might have a detrimental effect on their mood and ability to operate. But it wasn't all destructive. Eastland suggested that it could be used to modify the molecular makeup of the upper atmosphere, increasing the levels of ozone to fill the ozone hole and to break up various chemical entities such as carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide and nitrous oxides. Even though the claims in the patent seemed extraordinary and were probably somewhat over the top, ARCO still passed the idea of the ionospheric heater and its possible uses to Simon Ramo, who had led the development of microwave and missile technology and was instrumental in the creation of the ICBMs. He passed it to the Defense Department, who then gave it to the Pentagon's advanced research arm DARPA. The big claims may well have raised a few eyebrows in the military, and its electronic beam steering and reflection technology would have been of great interest to them, but the overall size of the proposed project would have been massive. For Eastland's patent to create the effects it claimed were possible, it would call for a site with a maximum output of 100 gigawatts of true power, not the fictional ERP figure. That's some 27,700 times more powerful than HAARP's 3.6 megawatts. If Eastland's design used the same 20 kilowatt antennas and layout dimensions as at HAARP, it would need 5 million antennas, which would take up an area measuring 51 kilometers by 51 kilometers, big enough to cover the city of Houston in Texas. This is why Eastland and ARCO suggested that the power should come from the huge natural gas reserves of Alaska's North Slope. It would have been a massive cash cow to ARCO to supply the gas. To put this 100 gigawatt requirement into context, it's 9% of the United States' total electrical power capacity of 1100 gigawatts. The biggest gas-fired power stations in the world are in Russia and can generate 5.5 gigawatts of power each. Eastland's array would need 18 of these working at full power to supply the 100 gigawatts. Eastland's idea was just too grandiose, but the scientists saw the opportunity to build a much smaller facility that would allow them to test ideas and gain a much greater understanding of the ionosphere. So with the help of the Alaskan Senator Ted Stevens, $10 million of funding was provided and paid to ARCO to build a prototype HAARP research facility at a site of a US Air Force over-the-horizon radar which had been cancelled before completion at Gakona, Alaska. Because of the location of HAARP, it would be able to tap into the auroral electrojet, an electric current that circulates in the polar regions of the ionosphere. By modulating the auroral electrojet with an ELF wave, it would act like an incredibly long virtual antenna high in the sky to transmit these VLF and ELF signals, something that the US Navy were particularly interested in. So now we can see where we get this conflation of ideas between the HAARP research facility and Eastland's original patent, but the two are not the same. HAARP operates sporadically throughout the year for short periods of time and does not use microwaves to energize the atmospheric gases as some people think, so it's not like a giant microwave oven. Its operating frequency of 2 to 10 megahertz is 2,000 times lower than the 2.45 gigahertz used in a microwave oven. And you know when HAARP is working because you can hear its characteristic tones in the shortwave band up to many thousands of kilometers away. HAARP is not the only site like this. There are other smaller ones in Russia and Norway, but HAARP is the most powerful and has been able to create controlled effects in the ionosphere such as faint airglow, ELF and VLF signals. It's detected previously unknown ionospheric effects which have advanced our understanding of the ionosphere greatly, and some say that it's proof of concept that Eastland's ideas could work. So what are your views on HAARP? Should we do this sort of research considering its origins or leave well alone? Let me know in the comments. So thanks for watching, and don't forget to check out some of our other videos if you get the time, and please subscribe, thumbs up and share.
And please do subscribe to Curious Droids videos. They're well worth a look, and as you could see from that exposition, not at all, how can I put it, flaky, fully supported by information content. Now, as to conspiracy theories. For any Australian who hasn't listened on web SDRs, the American so-called 75 metre band is quite an eye-opener. If you thought CB radio behaviour was bad, have a listen to the area between 3.8 and 4 megahertz on any, particularly Western American web SDR. They're full of conspiracy theories. I've heard racism. I've heard music, satirical music actually made to satirise other amateurs. So I've decided, at a slight risk, to play some of this stuff. The first item, and all of this, I won't identify the stations that they came from, but sometimes I wonder what they put in the water in California particularly, because this stuff is so nuts. It is so nuts. It's worth having a listen to, and is its own warning, I think, a dire warning. Mind you, this is a very small proportion of American hams, 90%, 95% on 75 metres is quite legitimate, sensible operation. But there are some particularly bad operators over there, and I'd like to, if I might, give you a listen to not only the conspiracy theories, but some of the music that gets played on 75 metres, and it must be played by people with fairly advanced equipment, I suspect software-defined equipment, because of its fidelity on sideband, and with an awful lot of power, because it can be received on 80 metres anywhere in the continental United States and on web SDRs in Hawaii. So here is a sample of Radio Madness from the 75 metre band in America. First of all, let's listen to a conspiracy theory about Australia. American radio ham on 3850 kilohertz, broadcasting alleged Australian events on the 21st.
Let me share just one more detail here. This is coming out of Australia, and so, we've been talking a lot about Canada, how the police there were using sticks and trampling people with horses and, breaking windows in trucks, that were part of the convoy and arresting folks and really engaging in violence. That's not new in Australia. Australia has the same, right, and has had for quite some time. But importantly, down in Australia, although you wouldn't know this much from the mainstream media, they've had some very large, like tens of thousands to near 100,000 people protests coming down into their various capitals, right, at the state level. One of them is a city called Canberra, right? And
well, having not been trampled by a horse in the past week, I really wouldn't know what the man's talking about, but let's hear what else he has to say about our good population.
So they had nearly 100,000 protesters there in Canberra. So to disperse the crowd, this is interesting and very concerning. To disperse the crowd, they used some devices. Of course, this is a ham radio net, right? So we're familiar with how radio waves work. They used some microwave energy, targeted microwave energy beams to disperse the crowd.
Good heavens, a death ray!
And so folks are familiar with how microwave energy works. You can focus it, and it can be quite damaging to tissue. If you're in the focus of the microwave beam, kind of like you heat your food, right? But somewhat stronger. And of course, if you put your hand in the microwave, it wouldn't be very good with your hand. We did see now, this is from some social media postings.
Oh, what a reliable source.
Folks that were at those protests have some very severe burns to various parts of their body as a result of these microwave emitters.
Or maybe it was sunburn, because that day it was about 38 degrees, wasn't it?
Right. So lips, faces, pretty much any type of skin that was exposed, eyes, etc. And so large blisters, basically second-degree burns as a result of the radio wave emissions energy that was beamed at the crowd. And so folks...
Or maybe they hadn't slipped, slopped and slept.
At the time didn't really understand what it was. But photos, of course, were being taken, and in analysis of some of those photos later, you can see the microwave emitter arrays, if you will, set up across some high points around their actual government building there. And
yeah, they've been there since 1980.
That's what was used to disperse the crowd. So the crowd, of course, had no idea what was happening to them until they got home, and then the burns, of course, would set in, and then you get the significant blistering. Literally second-degree burns were some of the images that I had seen. So there in Canberra, that's how the protesters were treated. And then a final point I'd like to make, I was talking about World Economic Forum, right, and the New World Order, and how its Young Global Leaders program has placed folks into the various cabinets and leadership roles in government in many countries around the world.
Oh, we have aliens in our cabinet now.
Well, I'm not the only guy who knows that. I just know it because I read it. So in Canada recently...
Yes, he read it on social media. How very reliable.
This last week, actually, there was, in their parliamentary procedure, they have an opportunity for debate and questioning periods, right, where they can ask questions of other, leaders can ask questions of other leaders and engage in debate. And so as part of that process, one of the legislators there asked directly to, this would be their parliamentary chair, right, who the questions are directed to, and then someone else answers.
No, it wasn't the parliamentary chair. The person asking these questions was a senator from Queensland named, wait for it, Malcolm Roberts. Back to the commentary.
Asked directly.
Time now is 0253.
Now you can hear that signal come over the top, because at this point even the Americans were fed up with this guy's rubbish.
Zulu, Whiskey Alpha 7, Bravo Zulu India, WA 7 BZI Seattle, with a special QST announcement.
Well, that was bad enough. But there is a so-called amateur in California who calls himself W6WBJ. He has not been licensed for quite a number of years. His original license was withdrawn by the FCC because of his behaviour, playing music, which is illegal in America, fortunately not here, and for jamming various nets, specifically one WARFA net, the Western Amateur Radio Friendship Association, because it has Negro participants, including a chap named Moody. Anyway, he calls himself W6WBJ, which stands for World's Best Jammer, and he infests 3845 kilohertz on 75 metres, playing songs that he composes himself lampooning other hams. Here is an example, and I play this not for its entertainment value, but as a warning.
Suck your dick.
Here's a Stevie ditty, you can sing it right away. Now here is what you think, so sing it while you may.
Can I suck your dick?
Now it's a jamming ditty, you can sing it night or noon.
Why don't you shut the f*** up?
Here's a word, that's all you need, cause I just sang the tune.
You.
Yeah, you can have him, I don't want him, he's too weird for me. Yes, he's too weird for me. Yeah, way too weird for me.
I stick my thingy between her thingies, and well, what do you think about that?
Yeah, you can have him, I don't want him, he's too weird for me. Yes, much too weird, way too weird, he's too weird for me.
Fuck yourself.
I get dizzy, I get numb when I listen to that dum-dum-dum-mo. You can have him, I don't want him, he's too weird for me.
He needs to go to hell and stick his butt into hell.
Yes, too weird for me. Whoa, way too weird for me.
Does he stick his butt in my asshole?
Yeah, you can have him. I don't want him. He's too weird for me. Yes, he's too weird. Much too weird. He's too weird for me.
You're a goddamn asshole.
Can he keep his lips still? No, 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 no.
You get the general idea. This is a typical W6WBJ illegal effort on 75 metres, but this is recorded about 500 kilometres away from the originating station. While I'm impressed by the audio quality of sidebandness, the content just takes one's breath away. And this is not the worst that I've heard. The political comments and the racist comments have gone beyond belief. But to continue, I'll just let this run through. This is a typical night on 75 metres in America, specifically on 3845 kilohertz, only a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, you can have him. I don't want him. He's too weird for me. Yeah, he's too weird. Way too weird. Much too weird for me. He's a nuisance. He's a crumbo. If he shuts up, we could have a few. So you can have him. I don't want him. He's too weird for me.
You know, I would not play with his marmor.
Yeah, much too weird for me. Whoa, way too weird for me. Yeah, you can have him. I don't want him. He's too weird for me.
You need to find out what a marmor is, man. I'm not playing no marmors.
Yeah, much too weird. Way too weird. He's too weird for me.
I would play with your thingy, but I don't do that sort of thing with people that I don't know, especially somebody with AIDS.
Does he have any friends?
I don't mean to denigrate your flashlight.
No, 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 no.
I need to fart. I need to take a dump. 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 So let me take a dump. You know, I need to really take a really heavy dump.
Do we care what he says? No, 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 no.
I don't know. Do I have a surge to bleach? I don't know. I do. I think I do.
Does he have an excuse?
Fuck you, marshmallow.
Can he stay off the Jews?
I love Art Limbaugh.
He's a miserable ultra-liberal.
It was like a sesquinated sexual pleasure night.
Hi-ho, Steve-O.
Did I say something wrong? I want to... We're better than they are, and they know it. Why don't you go lick your stick, cunt?
And thus we have a typical night on 75 metres in America. Yes, that's ham activity. Fortunately, it's not in not in the majority. But before we leave 75 metres, just one more bit that easy to listen to off web SDRs from California, the one at Point Reyes, the one at Half Moon Bay west of San Francisco. Either of these you can listen to this rubbish if you're as depraved as I am. However, here is a piece of freeform music that I was amazed to hear on 3845 kilohertz.
What is a degree in film?
Oh, it's just as good as philosophy.
I can't actually define this as music.
Wow, what a great singer.
Well, that's one opinion of it. Anyway, I won't play any more of that, but that gives you some idea. I really wonder what's in the water. What's in their water? Is there something sending them round the twist? And is that the same water that Putin's drinking? One really wonders. This is VK3AML with a series of ham radio clips. Some completely bizarre, but at least you heard them first on VK3AML. If you want to see the video that goes with this, please do refer to the Google search for the phrase VK3AML 12 March 2022. I'll play one more clip to take us up to 11 o'clock and a live QSO, hopefully. And thank you to all the people that are listening in on the stream. What have we got here? Let's just have a look. Perhaps just a quick item from VK3BVW. VK3BVW, who has an excellent YouTube channel here in Melbourne, and he's talking about the fate of the land at Radio Australia. It's commonly thought that Radio Australia is demolished and gone, but 3BVW went there at the end of last year. Let's have a listen to what he has to say about what actually is at Shepparton now.
Occasionally, I hear Facebook rumours that the antennas at the old Shepparton transmitter site at Radio Australia have all been dismantled and the buildings have been demolished. So I went to Shepparton to see for myself. It turns out that those rumours are wrong. My wife and I have recently returned from a week-long holiday at Newmerka. It's about 30 kilometres north of the rural city of Shepparton. Of course, I just had to stop off at the intersection of Verney Road and the Goulburn Valley Highway, home of the former Radio Australia transmitter site. And to my great delight, I found that the antennas are still very much standing. The main transmitter building is still there, and the feeder network to the antennas is still in place. So, out came the camera for a few quick shots. When we returned home, I contacted several of my sources to find out the current status of the site, but they weren't able to tell me much on this occasion. However, I sent a quick email to Peter Rentish, VK3AXI. Peter is the president of the always active Shepparton and District Amateur Radio Club, and he helped shed some light on what has been happening there recently. Peter reports that the site is no longer owned by BAI Communications Australia. It was sold and is now owned by a group of real estate developers. It is suspected that the land will eventually be turned over to housing. However, there is a historical overlay on some of the antennas and the buildings, which means they look likely to remain on the site in some form or another even after future development. Currently, the building is basically empty except for a couple of old transmitters. Now, the local amateur radio club has approached the real estate developers and the Shepparton Council with a proposal to set up a radio museum. It appears the proposal has been well received, but any action on this could be some years down the track. However, if the plans eventually come to fruition, this would be great news. So, here are some photos that I took on July the 9th showing parts of the curtain array, some of the other antennas, the feeder distribution network, and the building, the main building. Thanks for watching.
These are photographs from last July, I think. And the masts and the curtain arrays are all still standing, as you can see there. Maybe a few of them have come down.
24 hours a day in English and also in Chinese.
Photos taken by Rob, VK3BVW. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima. If you look in on our stream, which you can find by Googling VK3AML 12 March 2022, you can see what we're talking about. VK3AML testing and radiating a coverage of Radio Australia as it is now after close down. It's still there. It's the transmitter building and the switching yard. Antenna switching there, I think. Nigel Holmes, 3RZ, could tell you more. The main gate. Thanks to the Interval Signals website for Radio Australia audio.
This is Radio Australia, the international service of the Australian...
No, it isn't actually, it's VK3AML, but anyway. And thank you for watching VK3BVW's clip. So that brings us back to us, and I have to change my headphone arrangement to listen off the mixer so I can hear what's coming in on 2 meters. VK3AML testing and about to open up for a QSO. And now we're on the mixer. I can bring in the output of 2 meters. So let's see who's about. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima calling now CQ on 147.475 and hopefully standing by for any calls.
VK3ACZ.
Okay, so far we've got VK3 Alpha Charlie Zulu. G'day Peter. Hope you didn't mind the more uproarious material played tonight, but I thought it came on at, I think, 20 to 11. The mother Grundies would probably be in bed that would object to it. But you see what I mean by stuff that leaves our CB exchanges in Melbourne for dead over there on 75 metres. Here in Australia, 80 metres is almost dead. I think on even the most active night you'd be hard-pressed to see more than 5 stations on 80 metres, exclusive of CW and Whisper and WSJT and all that sort of thing. So we've got Peter, VK3ACZ. Anybody else like to come in for a chat? VK3AML. Sounds like we've got it solo this week, Peter. I'm surprised. I was expecting to hear Dave somewhere in there. VK3ACZ, how have you been? VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML. Saturday night broadcast, VK3ACZ. Good evening, Chris, and thank you as always for a very, very varied but thoroughly fascinating, interesting and absorbing broadcast tonight. Yeah, I'm a bit surprised Dr. Dave isn't there as well. Maybe he'll still pop in a little bit later. Anyway, I might as well get the ball rolling with some comments about it all. Tom's video up there at Listerfield, Treadley Mobile, was terrific. I spoke to him during the week. I was in the city, and he came up on the 3RCC repeater there in Collins Street or wherever it is, and had a quick chat to him. He was on the way to a doctor's appointment. But the thing I liked about his little broadcast the most was watching him operate his 817, because just early this week a brand new FT818 followed me home from the toy shop, and I'm very happy to have it sitting here on top of my 9918 that I'm speaking to you on. But anyway, the next thing, the HAARP. It's not changing the weather. Oh, I'm so disappointed. I'll have to come up with some new conspiracy theories, all very fascinating and interesting about that one. 75 metres, saying that it's as bad as our CB or worse. No, that's a big call, Chris. I don't know that anything could be as bad as our UHF CB, at least. The times when I've listened to the Arthur Seat repeater of just what we were hearing tonight that you recorded was way more advanced and the intellectual superior of anything that you would hear on that UHF repeater. And the death ray, yes. Loved your sarcasm. Your sarcasm was just as entertaining as the ridiculous comments that were being made, but in a totally different way, of course, a much better way. And yes, his reliable source, social media, well, it can't be wrong. Anyway, you covered all that. You also mentioned the audio quality, which I was thoroughly impressed with as well. Just 80 metres does not sound like that to me down here, at least not in the suburban confines with all its QR Mary. And W6WBJ, World's Best Jammer. Yes, what a name. The song, look, it was almost, I had a chuckle or two until the novelty wore off, and I don't mind that stuff being played there, just so long as it's not played on our bands. He said he needed to take a dump repeatedly. I thought he was having one. And almost last but not least, the pictures of Radio Australia were superb. When I used to run my overnighters up to Shepparton, I would take the railway car up and have a look at Radio Australia, and a couple of things were fascinating. My little communications receiver, I only had to drive 10 k's up the road and I could hardly hear Radio Australia. And given that it was pushing 500k or something similar, I found that quite surprising that the field strength didn't completely saturate everything for miles around. But I'm pleased to see that it's all still there. I spent many a happy afternoon looking at the antenna array and trying to figure out how it all worked. Of course, was never able to. Anyway, that's enough for the first round. Back to you, and hope you've had a good week, Chris. VK3AML, VK3ACZ.
And we say morning, VK3GG.
G'day, John. VK3, acknowledging VK3GG. Yeah. Well, the skip distance when you get up to 15 or 20 megahertz is in the ground waves go out only a very short distance, and the waves are skipping over you to come down 500 to 1,000 kilometres away. I remember hearing many years ago, gosh, more than 50 years ago, the late Dick Fitzsimons, VK3RZ, who lived in Toorak Road, Hawthorn, and I lived near Camberwell Junction, only about 1.5 miles distant, about 3 k's. And I used to hear him very strongly on 160 metres because on 1.8 megs you've still got ground wave, particularly during the day. He switched up to 80 metres with the same power output and the same transmitter, AM, and I couldn't hear him at all at a distance of 3 kilometres, just nothing, absolutely nothing, no ground wave. Then he went to 40 metres and I could hear him weakly by backscatter. So the ionosphere is a fickle thing. If you really want really good ground wave performance, it's our 630 metre band is really the outstanding performer, because the ground wave there goes out 1,000 kilometres even during the day. You can get 24-hour coverage on 630 metres, which I guess is the reason why they kept 500 kilohertz going as a ship-to-shore channel going all the way from 1912 when they opened VIM. And it was originally POM, Papa Oscar Mary, but they changed it to VIM before the First World War. And that was operating from 1912 to the year 2000, I think, all on 500 kilohertz, because it had that fantastic ground wave reach, but it required very large antennas, and a lot of ships were not not equipped with antennas that could really be electrically big enough. It was really designed for reception by freighters and ocean liners. With that, I'll hand it round to VK3AML with a pause if any other breakers are there. VK3AML and group VK3AML.
Yes, 3AML, VK3EGG. Yes, it was good to see that the Radio Australia antennas and everything haven't been demolished. Actually, I've heard there are people who think that our shortwave service should resume. Of course, I'm one of them anyway. I think it was stupid they closed it down. Yes, that last song that you said you couldn't recount as music. Well, I do remember some of the efforts by John Lennon and Yoko Ono doing their avant-garde experimental music, and some of that music sounded a little bit like that. So yes, needless to say, I didn't buy the record. But anyway, yes, I don't know what you've done to your system tonight on the internet, because it came through on the mobile phone tonight. But when it wasn't coming through on previous weekends, it didn't come through on people watching on Raspberry Pis, on whatever it puts out on Pyarian either. So, or was it called Raspberry Linux or whatever? And both those things used to take till the next day or two to appear. So I'm not really sure what's going on there. Anyway, VK3EGG bye.
And VK3ECG.
Ah, there's Dave. Okay, John, and putting down Dave on the list. VK3ECG. ECG and EGG. I'll have to be careful, I might not alliterate properly. And nice to hear you back in Victoria. Dave, you were missed the last couple of weeks. Last week I actually dropped off because my wife went through some very severe spinal surgery where they had to separate two lumbar vertebrae with a plate inserted, do some bone grafting to relieve pressure on the spinal cord, which might otherwise have left her a paraplegic, which was not a nice thing to look forward to. I can tell you that the operation has been an outstanding success. She is walking. She's in a lot of pain at the moment, you can imagine, with the bone grafts taking, but that will slowly subside, and we can look forward to at least perambulating to some extent for the rest of her life. And the severe pain in the legs has gone, referred pain from the spine. So with all of that going on, really, I wasn't getting much sleep, both from the point of view of having to dive into hospital, running how can I put it, laundry loads back and forth for her, washing them here. But I couldn't actually visit her for a week. She was, they have the COVID restrictions and you can't actually visit in hospital, so I was batching for a week, and now I'm looking after her with cooking and fetching and washing and all the rest of it, and learning a great deal about culinary things in the process under her tutelage. So although we've been through a bit of a crisis, and I didn't have time for this last week, things are coming good now. So how did was it a Sydney trip, Dave? How did your conference go? Were you probing around in more dead bodies for forensic evidence of this and that? And did they make that very off-colour joke about do you want a hand, and then pick up one from a body bag and throw it at you? Sorry, after that music earlier on, I think my sense of humour's gone slightly sick. VK3ECG and group VK3AML.
And we sent a cheerio to Anthony, which I forgot before. I noticed he said he was listening on the mobile phone thing.
Yes, fine there. Yeah, from VK3ECG. Yes, very nice and interesting production tonight, Chris. Yep, all's good. I have been around all the time, actually, because I was watching on YouTube, of course, with a delay. By the time I realised you were about to start the ratio and so on, I had you'd already been going for a while, which is why I didn't come in right at the beginning, but I was there. Yes, so Sydney was interesting as my first trip for well, quite some time, actually. Well, almost 2 years. So it was good to get outside Melbourne, and interesting, all the precautions on the airplanes and airports and things like that, as to be expected. It was all fairly standard, really. Of course, the weather could be described as appalling, really. I was fortunate to be able to stay very close to the conference hotel, literally probably about 20 metres across the road. So I did absolutely nothing except be in the hotel, walk across the road to the conference, spend the time in the conference, walk back to the hotel, and that was about it. I didn't even get to walk around Darling Harbour or anything like that, which is a shame, but the weather was just appalling. There was one really nice bit of sunshine at one point, which I did go out onto a balcony and photograph, but I was in the middle of sessions then and doing my own talk and other bits and pieces that were going on. So it was most interesting. It was a very mixed conference, mixture of things. So it was the College of Pathologists Australasia's conference. So we have, yes, forensic things, but most of the conference, of course, is ordinary clinical pathology and things like that. Very much enjoyed seeing the videos tonight, and the HAARP two videos, really interesting stuff. And you can see how the more complex something is, the more it lends itself to somebody misconstruing various aspects of it and giving rise to a very fertile imagination and lots of things. Although, as you pointed out, it's interesting, the sort of origins of some of these things and the thoughts people had about them. Very nice to see the video of Tom, and also the video of Rob, because I know 3BVW quite well. In fact, I visited him in his shack. I would be perhaps a year or so ago, between the gap in the various bits and pieces that we have with COVID, and I've known him probably for 15, 20 years, I suspect, or something like that. Not so much from the amateur radio connection, but he's another person a bit like Steve, and comes from the music and teaching side. So from that aspect of his background, though he has, as you can see from his page, he's got an interest in photography as well, and has got some absolutely fabulous photographs up on his page as well. Always good to chat to, and interested also in some FT8 and so on. So there we are, a broad set of interests. I'm glad Prue's getting on, and things are going well. Sometimes the graft sites, if it's your own autograft, can be more painful than the operation site. I know what that's like. All right, back to you, Chris. VK3AML, the group VK3ECG.
Have we got any more breakers for the group VK3AML listening? Just the four of us, the VK3CG and group VK3AML. Yeah, in the old days when I was working, before I was 60, I'd frequently go to conferences like I was for a while the vice president of an organisation called the International Association of Sound Archives Australian Division in the early 80s, and the conferences were held at the ANU. They would put you up there, and from memory they used one of the ANU's halls for the conference. This is in the days before the National Film and Sound Archive was created as a separate unit from the National Library, because now the NFSA is in the old Institute of Anatomy building on the ANU's campus in Canberra, a nice old Art Deco building, one of the very early ones in Canberra. Of course, Canberra pre-war was a tiny village. My father-in-law, just as a matter of interest, was an English teacher at the Canberra High School. There was only one pre-war, and he died at the age of 98 in 2013. He had a lot of stories about Canberra as it was. Everybody knew everybody pre-war, and he would meet regularly people like Billy Hughes, Arthur Fadden, quite a few of the early Australian Prime Ministers. And on one occasion at the bar at Ainslie, he met the Australian comedian George Wallace, for which he had lots of stories. They got drunk together, apparently. Anyway, I'll hand it round to Peter, VK3ACZ. As for the UHFCB, Peter, my understanding is that that repeater has been closed down. It may have reopened since I last listened, but it's been closed down except for the do not use this frequency for simplex contacts announcement. So you won't hear anything on it at the moment except for that recording, and I believe that some other repeater has become the gathering place for miscreants. VK3ACZ and group, VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML in the group. I can finally say that. VK3ACZ. Yes, I believe you're right. I haven't heard anything on that frequency for a while now, and there is another repeater that haven't got the frequency here with me, but I think everyone will know what it is, and it's just more of the same. Thanks for letting me know about Prue. I meant to ask about her in my first over, so that's all good news there, Chris. And good evening, Dr. Dave. Yes, I missed you the last couple of weeks too, and good evening to you, John. I often make comments about HF propagation, and 20 metres usually comes up in conversation, as you'll no doubt recall. It's been absolutely off the scale the last few days. It's been incredible, and what I've noticed, and I know the year is progressing and the grey line is changing, we're very close to the equinox, but even as early as 4 p.m. Local time, 20 metres has been opening up long path to Europe. It's been absolutely incredible. I went out portable on Friday and had an absolute ball-buster of a time. Worked a couple of new countries, the Maldives, or that was on 15 metres, but Martinique, I had to look up Martinique. Fox Mike 8 something or other call sign. Oh, actually, what was it? I'm looking at the logbook. Quebec Romeo, Fox Mike 8 Quebec Romeo, got to speak to him, and I love it when I'm getting geography lessons all the time. Yes, I do now know it's in the Caribbean, but I didn't when I first spoke to him. And yes, he had the very strong French accent, and of course, silly me, I forgot to say au revoir, merci beaucoup. But what I wanted to relay to you, and especially to Dave, is had another chat with G4AKC, Dave, Push Bike Mobile, well, Tricycle Mobile to be technically correct, and G4 November Victor Fox, Steve, who was just a few kilometres away from him there around Blackpool in Lancashire. And that wasn't the best bit, because I've done that before on 20 and 40. What was absolutely incredible is that they were both dropping their power. Now, Steve went down to 5 watts, and I received him 5x4. Dave, however, oh dear, he went down to 1 watt, and I was hearing him 5x4. Now, I gather there are the caudal hops happening, because it's incredible stuff. But wait for it, even better again, he went down to 100 milliwatts. And I don't doubt him, because he spoke to other people, and he was making videos of all this to post on his web channel or whatever. At 100 milliwatts, he claimed, I was getting him 3x2. I kid you not. You've probably all had experiences like that yourselves. I haven't. I spoke to a San Diego fellow on 40 metres one night who was running 5 watts QRP, and he couldn't stop laughing. He was so excited. Well, I was just as excited, because I was hearing him 5x5. But this really took the cake. This was afternoon. This is long path and everything, so it's 23,000 something kilometres. And even better, Dave went lower than 100 milliwatts, and I couldn't hear it because of the snap, crackle and pop from some lightning storms that were making their presence felt on 20 metres. I have a strong feeling that I would have been able to hear him on a lot less than 100 milliwatts. I'd be interested to know if anybody else has had a similar experience to that. I'll say one thing, I'll never be afraid of QRP ever again. And the 818 that as I said, followed me home from the toy shop this week, I've already heard myself coming through clearly on a VK6 Kiwi SDR. So QRP might be the next big challenge, especially as the sunspot cycle's getting better. And last comment for this over, I noticed today that we had a bit of geomagnetic activity. There was a G1 storm. The K index was up at 6 or something at one stage. Didn't affect propagation on 20 metres. The States and the Caribbean were coming in gangbusters. So there you go, that's enough for one over. Back to you, Chris, VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ.
I was just waiting there to see if anybody else would pop up. Yeah, look, I must, if I can be so rude as to invite myself on one of your field expeditions with your HF rig. I'd like to get some of that on video. Always searching for new video material, and I think I'm going to have to create some rather than relying on BVW and FTOM and all the rest of them all the time. I was going to also draw attention to the website of Roly ZL1BQD in Auckland, who has some very good video material up there, and for a guy in his late 70s, he's doing extremely well. So I would have, under those circumstances, had everything from Tom, who's FTOM, who's 17, through to Roly in his late 70s. It really is, I think, in spite of what everybody says, this is an extraordinary hobby. And what's making it more extraordinary with time is the association of radio with computers, either for multi-subcarrier digital file transfer on HF radio, or for non-print, for non-voice communication, fax, photos, not the crappy photos that we used to transmit via analogue slow scan, but the full digital file transfer. Of course, you can transfer really good photos. I saw a comment on the text chat there from Robert Varner over in USA saying the amateur radio is not going to last much longer. I think it will. With a hardcore of experimenters and home constructors, it'll always be seen as a reservoir of self-training for operators in electronics. And now that there's the computer associated with ham radio itself is changing. It's no longer just Morse or voice. There's a lot more to it. In fact, I probably should do one complete night on slow scan TV from a number of different points of view. Yoko Ono. Yes, that screaming piano plus vocal production there from 3840 kilohertz really is something. Actually, 3840 kilohertz used to be the gathering place for all of that rubbish on 80 metres. I think most good operators used to leave them alone. I note that a couple of American web STRs actually have 3840 kilohertz blocked out for 4 kilohertz either side of that frequency, and I think that sort of operation has something to do with it. But most of the American phone operation on what we would call 80 metres is actually on what they call 75 metres, the region from 3.7, 3.8 megs through to 4 megs, which is available as a ham band in America. Okay. Over to, I think, John VK3AML, and I wonder how your week's been, John, up there on the hill. And hello to Anthony if he's watching or listening on the stream. The only thing I changed this week, John, in terms of streaming, is I reinserted the link password that goes between the video streaming software and the internet connection, and that may have had an effect. VK3EGG and the group VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML, VK3EGG, yes, righto, fine, all right. Yes, well, perhaps that's what did it, because it's the first weekend where I've been able to watch it live as it goes on. since about a month or two before Christmas. So whatever's happened, it seems to have worked. So I hope it keeps on like that. So I watched all that. Yeah, the things about HAARP and the other thing, the scatter radar, which it grew from, that was all very interesting. There's actually been articles on those things over the years in Electronics Australia, because whether I bought the magazine or not, I used to even do things like read things in the news age, and I'd read the articles, but if there wasn't an interesting circuit to build or something, I wouldn't buy the magazine, and a couple of news agents ticked me off for that one too. But anyway, so I've seen all these articles about both the ionospheric scatter radar and the HAARP in various EA magazines over the years. It's all been quite interesting, and then I've heard all the nonsense. Yeah, it's like the anti-vaxxers now. I think we have a lot of Luddites in society, and whether it's new drugs or new electronics or new anything, they just don't like it. And so they come up with all these conspiracy theories to try and put people off. I guess that's what happens. I guess that power supply you have at your place that you can hear the fan in the background sometimes is one of those Dick Smith power supplies with the voltage and amp meter that goes up to 15 volts. So I think it puts out about 10 or 15 amps if you're lucky, where the fan cuts in after a while, like this one does. In fact, I've got another power supply I'm going to put in, because I can't run the amplifier here at its absolute maximum power. I can only run it at about 90 watts at the moment, because that's the limit that power supply with a noisy fan can put out. And even though I took out the original fan and put in a computer muffin fan, it's a lot quieter than it was, but you can still hear it a bit in the background. Righto, well, I think that's all things for this over commented on, so I'll put it by.
Okay, John, I'm actually showing the power supply concerned. I've not got the extension cord on the webcam, so I can only get it a certain distance. There it is with the 2 meters. It can go to 25 amps. I have tested it, given it a test on that. There were 2 versions of that power supply put out, the low amperage version and the high amperage version. This is the high amperage one. Surprisingly, I got that at a Hamfest for $50. It had a mild fault in it, 1 resistor. Replaced that, never had another bit of problem out of it. It also had the two what do you call it, screw terminals on the front broken off, so I replaced those. But considering only $50, it's very good value. And as I say, I have run it at high amperage, but with the 40 watts I run here, the FT7900 is fairly, that's there underneath the desk, you can see if you're watching the stream, and you'll see I've actually fitted a 15 centimetre fan, an extraction fan rather than a blowing fan, that actually pulls the air out of the ventilation holes at the bottom of the FT7900 and keeps it quite cool for the very long periods that this has to run on a Saturday night. Never had a problem with it, and for the amount of power it puts out, 50 watts, it's only drawing about 7 or 8 amps. So it's more than 50% efficient, that transmitter, when it's transmitting FM, which is better than you can say for most. Very good for portable operation too. I can unbolt it from the desk, stick it in a box, take a lithium battery with me and head off up the hills. And frequently I've gone to ham field days operating 70 centimetres and 2 metres with that very rig. It's quite small. You can see the size of my hand by the side of it there if you're watching the stream. And I note that Robert Varner, watching from America, it's breakfast time over there, 7:30 a.m. Oh, I can't, oh, that's it. Just, I put the webcam on its normal place, and it's now looking in the right direction for your loving and affection. He's watching at 7:30 a.m, presumably on Saturday morning, just as we're about to go into Sunday here. It's 11:34 p.m. here, and Rob, you must be on the east coast of America, because I know I speak to occasionally friends in Salt Lake City, and they're only 5 hours ahead of us, which would mean it would be 4:30 over there. So yeah, you must be somewhere on the east coast, New York, Virginia, something like that. Not New York, Virginia, but you know, Richmond, Virginia, or New York, New York. I better hand it over before I put my foot too much in it internationally. Oh, speaking of that, 2 weeks ago I showed some video of some refugees who were making YouTube videos in English, the very few that were making it out of Ukraine, and videoing their own escape from the Ukraine in English. And I'm happy to say that Luba and the young couple that we saw escaping from Ukraine are now safe. Luba is in Poland and the young couple is in Germany. The guy in that couple was German, the girl was Ukrainian, so fortunately they could get out. Had he been a Ukrainian national, he would not have left the country. There's now universal conscription for all adult men between the ages of 18 and 60 in the Ukraine. It's a frightening situation, and it hasn't become anything less frightening in the last week. Round today, VK3CG and the group VK3AML.
Oh, just a quick one. By the time I logged the phone on, I missed out you showing that power supply.
Oh, you'll have to look at it on replay, John. Anyway, round to 3ECG Dave, VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML, VK3 and the group VK3ECG returning. Yes, interesting. Yes, I saw Robert's from New Jersey, and I like the picture of the cat interface on his transceiver, which is his picture on QRZ. It consists of a black and white cat lying across the top of the radio, no doubt obstructing all cooling vents, but a very cute picture nonetheless. Yeah, I was very impressed with the descriptions of G4AKC. It means, it really reminds me I need to get on a bit more. I think I have heard him actually, but it's extraordinary, some of this bicycle mobile stuff. There's quite a few good videos around actually of varying people with various push bike radio systems, and on YouTube I've seen a few people having some very interesting videos of portal operation. And yes, I mean, I've, as I said, I've done a little bit, and I've now sorted out my rucksack and everything. So I've got my 705 all ready to go, and I've actually been out a couple of times up onto Mount Lofty and so on, which is not, as I said before, not a mountain, but a mere hill, but is actually a very nice place to operate from, and particularly in the early morning where you get these wonderful, you know, you're literally above the mist that's in the over the Yarra River on the bend of the Yarra in Wonga Park, and it's a very, very nice place to go. But I must actually, interested in Tom's video as well. I should really try and see if I can get out of Listerfield and actually go up to that point and see what can be done at the trig point. But that sounds really interesting. I've watched some of the Curious Droids videos before actually. They are very, very informative and really interesting, and obviously has spent a lot of time actually getting those video presentations right. It actually always reminds me every time I watch one of Rob's videos as well. He just produces them very nicely, and I must say you can tell a person who has that strong educational element to what they do and explaining things, and it's really very beautifully done, and I'm very impressed with people who can do that in that way. I've been the other thing I've been doing is trying to keep going with some of my teaching things on Zoom, and I've run a couple of evening sessions in a little recent while. We'll get back to a bit more of that actually. Hopefully we'll go back to face-to-face in the second semester this year. It'll be nice, but it's certainly it's an interesting and very different experience. And for the first time actually, because I've been giving a lot of my evidence in court has all been by video as well, but the first time I actually went to court in person for ages and ages and ages giving evidence. So that was interesting. Although again, some interesting sort of challenges about how you do that, and you have to roll up to the tent outside the county court and have a swab taken before you're given a little card saying you're clear. Although the rat tests, the rats are very good, the reproduction tests, but they're not the same and not diagnostic in the same way as PCR. But it's an approach, and I'm sure an absolutely valid one. And while I was at the conference, in fact, one of my colleagues who had arrived, I think the day before me, became unwell, tested positive, and remained in the hotel room for the entire conference, unable to attend, and indeed had to stay in the hotel room for another 2 or 3 days after the conference before they could come back. It is still there and still causing problems, as we would expect. But yes, I've been not doing as much sideband, but I have been trying about a bit more FT8, and certainly in 10 metres FT8 was really interesting. Though I couldn't hear or see anything on my waterfall display, I was still able to work stations in the actually in the West Indies and Pacific Islands on 10 metres on FT8, which was fascinating. There's something very strange about working signals that are actually below the noise floor. I did sit down and read about the forward error correction, mathematical modelling that goes with it, and it's one of those things where you read through, you can understand it at the time, but as soon as you stop reading it or watching or whatever you're doing, it disappears very rapidly. You get the sense of how it works, but a lot of the mathematical stuff, not being a mathematician myself, disappears very, very quickly. Anyway, back to you, Chris. VK3AML of the group VK3ECG.
VK3ECG and group VK3AML, well, I'm in a similar position to you. The thing that tripped me up in electrical engineering was always the math, and specifically differential calculus. My powers of abstraction are not great, I'm the first to admit it, and while I could understand a rate of change and perhaps a rate of change of a rate of change, acceleration, etc., getting my head around the maths, and in the old days we had to learn all of these little equations that went with differentiation and integration, and in the years since I've used it in terms of capacitors and the phase shifts that they can introduce into audio circuitry and all the rest of it. But my education in that direction was interrupted in second year of Swinburne by the death of my father, when he was finally told that he was on his deathbed. I had the option of doing the final year or spending time with my dad. He died just before my 21st birthday, and I chose to spend the time with Dad because I knew it was the only time I'd have. And so finally, when I went into the workforce, I went in from the journalistic. I'd done a lot of writing when I was younger, on the journalistic side of radio rather than the engineering side, although the engineering side that I knew always stood me in good stead. In the ABC, if you could fix a busted roller 66 recorder, which on occasions I did, risking a strike through demarcation. But if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be paid, because I was floating staff, as they call it, working on how much program material I could put out rather than on time. So when your time was held up by facilities not being available, you had only one solution, and that was to go into the building at 3 o'clock in the morning with a soldering iron and do the dirty. This is all 45 years ago, mind you. And in those days, ABC Radio used to have a floor of the St James building in William Street. Well, not William Street, it was King Street, I think, about 2 blocks away from Broadcast House, and that was where the religious department and what they called special projects were, where I worked. Special projects would now be called radio talks and documentaries. I was there for 2.5 years. An interesting experience, not one that was entirely satisfactory to me, and I was always having to reapply for my own job, which was why eventually I went across to doing research for documentary films in Sydney at Film Australia. Oh, a long time ago, another life. Now, G4AKC on Pushbike Mobile, I'd be very interested to know what sort of an antenna he has and how he can use something the size of a pushbike as counterpoise for an HF antenna to get through to Australia. That'd be an interesting one. Did you hear anything about that, Peter? And the FM8 station, that's quite an achievement. So round to you, Peter. Did he tell you much about his antenna on his pushbike, VK3ACZ and group, VK3AML?
VK3AML and the group from VK3ACZ. He didn't tell me a lot about it. He described his location. He usually does. It was actually 8 degrees Friday morning their time, which is unusual because he's been out there a couple of times on his little treadly and it's been below 0. But his QRZ page has pictures of it. In fact, the first time I spoke to him, he said he was bicycle mobile. I kind of didn't believe him. It was only when I looked it up and saw the pictures. It's just a vertical whip on the back of his little trailer. There's another fellow, a friend of his, who was in the group that I spoke to. That's Echo Alpha 5 stroke G4VZV, Ken in Alicante, Spain. He sits on the water's edge there of the Mediterranean, and he's got his stuff in a little trolley with a vertical attached to that. Now, whether he runs a counterpoise in the ground or what, I don't know, but he gets out very well also. Dave, you mentioned 10 metres and the fun you were having on FT8. Well, I've got to say with a hint of sadness that one of my bucket list items is stateside on 10 metres, and that hasn't happened yet still. A couple of weeks ago, Dieter, 3FFB up in Heathmont there, only about 10 k's from me, he was giving stateside stations 5x9 on 10 metres, and I wasn't hearing them at all. I had to listen to the Adelaide, what's the name of it, 5... ARG SDR to hear the other side of the conversations he was having. So it's all ahead of me. And both of you expressed a little bit of difficulty with maths. Well, let me tell you, I've always insisted that there are only 3 kinds of people: those who can do maths and those who can't. But anyway, I'm wondering, talk about how good 20 metres was. I'm wondering if I can share with you this little recording I made. I'll see how I go, see if the audio passes muster. Thanks, Mike. Echo Alpha 5, Juliet Zulu. G'day, Paul. 5 and 9 plus 20. No wonder you're so popular. Smashing into Melbourne. VK3 Alpha Charlie Zulu, over.
I'll try to talk about it without pressing the foot. VK3 Alpha Charlie Zulu. EA5 Japan Zulu. Thank you, Peter, and I appreciate the 20 over. You're 15 over here, guys.
Roger, roger. Fantastic conditions today. The long path opened extra early. Thanks for being there, Paul. 7-3.
Oh, yeah, thanks for acknowledging me, guys. Back to net.
Back to net. Thanks, Mike.
John, would you put Alan through, please?
Yeah, anyway, I hope the audio was understandable. I gave him 20 over. That was on the Anzanet on Thursday. He gave me 15 over 9 back. Now, I'm barefoot with an NFAD long wire. Give you an idea how good propagation is. VK3AML on the group, VK3ACZ.
What was barefoot in terms of power, Pete?
100 whiskey.
Oh, okay. And you were operating from home?
No, that was out portable Thursday afternoon. And of course, Paul from Valencia in Spain, although his accent, as you will all know, is Glaswegian, I don't know what he runs, but I imagine it's a big beam antenna at super height. He is often 20 over 9 when the rest of Europe has completely disappeared and gone. He's always got a smashing signal, EA5JZ. Fantastic operator too, always really good to speak to. Back to you, Chris.
Just before we move on, what's your power source for your 100 watts portable?
Oh, sorry, I have a 100 amp hour lithium. It only weighs about 7 kilos. You know, I love the new technology that allows that, because before that I was using a glass mat, and of course that's 35 kilos. Where I go, I've got to walk up a bit of a hill. There's no way known I would carry a 35 kilo battery with me. Back to you.
Okay, but those 100 amp hour lithium batteries don't just weigh that amount. They weigh about $600, don't they?
Well, I was way ahead of that because a relative in Sandra's family is a Sparky, and I got it at trade prices. 3AML, 3ACZ.
I won't even ask. VK3ACZ and group, VK3AML. Very interesting. I really will have to get out to you and take a camera late afternoon, whatever afternoon suits. I think you have my phone number. You could contact me and I run up there on the bus. I can get up to Ferntree Gully fairly easily on a bus that goes directly from the end of my street. Anyway, sorry to keep you waiting, John. And I noticed that you must have sent quite a few newsagents out of business by reading all the magazines you should have bought before actually purchasing them. VK3GG and group VK3AML.
Yes, 3AML, VK3GG returning. Yes, right, fine. Well, actually a lot of people used to do that. They'd read the magazine and stand in the newsagents for about an hour reading it, and if they found a good circuit or something, they'd buy it, and if they didn't, they wouldn't. I mean, that's what I did when I was younger. Yes, well, I think the biggest problem with maths is, of course, in secondary school, or in fact in school in general, you have maths books where they don't actually tell you the theory of the maths. The maths books are designed for a good maths teacher to be teaching you the maths out of it, who knows everything that's not written in the book, so that you can't actually swat up the maths after school by using the maths book. I thought you could. So when I was a kid, I convinced myself I couldn't do school maths. However, I had a book called Mathematics Essential to Electronics and Wireless by McGraw-Hill, and I had some military radio technicians' books on doing maths, and I learnt some maths out of there, and I went to school with some of that, and it was above the head of the teachers that were meant to be teaching maths. Who, by the way, most of the maths teachers we had were the after-school sports masters, who could probably teach you to kick a football across the oval, but they just mumbled on in a monotonous tone, with the blackboard duster in the left hand going like a windscreen wiper, erasing what they'd written, with the right hand going squeakity squeakity squeak, and their head covering up what you were meant to see. So by the time they went across the board and got to the bottom, the board was still blank. And of course, if you said, put up your hand and said, "Please sir, I don't understand this," you got a detention. So you dare not ask. So basically we have an education system that's based on education by lottery, particularly with things like maths. And so I learnt to hate maths. Of course, I didn't get on with sport either, which made it even worse. So having the sports teachers who hated me supposedly teaching me maths, actually they made me learn less maths. And like I said, I could learn the maths for the electronics and everything, but I couldn't learn the maths out of the school books, because Well, as I now know, they don't tell you how the maths works in those books, not like they did in the other ones. So that was the problem there. Yes, St James Building. Well, I remember doing quite a lot of work in St James Building, installing various bits of equipment and pulling bits of equipment out and taking it across to floor 15 Marland House and sitting there for an afternoon working out why it did or didn't work and then putting it back again. And when I was on contract to the ABC through TNG Electricals, which is who actually employed me to work there, they had the contract agency to work in the ABC, because that's the system they were in the process of changing over to. They had a system of natural attrition, and everyone was going to be on contract through this agency, which actually paid a lot more money anyway, which the ABC staff didn't like. So I used to work in all the ABC places, from Marland House, Broadcast House and St James, and get sent over to Ripponlea, and then there was the Waverley Cinema, which was a 16-track recording studio, and a whole lot of places like that, which is quite entertaining. So, yeah, I've got happy days of working there, but yes, so it was all quite interesting. Something else I was going to say which I've forgotten. That's the trouble with Simplex. That's why I generally work crossband. But anyway, seeing I've forgotten what I was going to say in addition to that, I'll put it by.
No worries, John. I had a good laugh about what you were saying about maths teachers. Most of the maths teachers that I had were sadists. And in the early days in high school, they were handy with a cane or a strap. God, that would be frowned on these days, but this is all 50 years plus. Quite a bit more than 50 years now. I'm trying to think of the maths teachers that we had. Old Hardenberg. He taught French, German and maths. He had been a foot soldier for Hitler during the Second World War, and he still had a toothbrush moustache when we knew him. And I just remember him, whenever I'd look in the wrong part of the wrong book, he had I hope he's dead. He had a habit of looking at what I was reading, which generally was something like the Boys' Book of Crystal Sets or something like that. Chris, there's definitely some sets wrong with you. You take your books and you move over there. And, he'd usually put me in with the girls. This is supposed to be a punishment. At 13 or 14, to be put in with the girls was not punishment. It was a delight. The first girl I got keen on was as a result of Hardenberg shifting me out of the men's part of the class. The classes at Camberwell High were fairly heavily segregated, you see. And yes, it was a pleasant memory that came out of an unfortunate situation. But yes, I got on well with the English teachers. They always seemed to be encouraging you in a literary way, which sort of suited me fine. But all of the memory work, particularly towards Form 6, Grade 12, of having to memorise all of those little quadratic equations associated with differentiation and integration were just... They pushed my ability to abstract ideas, to visualise. On a graph with two axes, I could see how two things could interact, but trying to get things to work in 3 dimensions, it started to exceed my powers of observation. Many years later, actually, I had as much trouble assimilating how you use load lines with power valves, how you design an output circuit to match properly with the load lines. That stretches you a bit. At least it stretched me. VK3ECG in the group, and I hope you were never a maths teacher, Dave. I could have offended you. VK3ECG, VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3ECG returning with a short pause, but no, certainly not. I admire people who have the mathematical brain, and I suspect it's a sort of function of how you think and what sort of approaches you have. Whilst I was a sort of science person, I was much more bioscience and chemistry than I was really. In many respects, physics and maths, and the physics that I did was very mathematically based. In fact, in my physics school exams, or the A-levels and things like that exams, they were a couple of the physics questions were basically proving mathematical equations, and so it was really almost straight maths in some respects, which didn't actually suit me very well at all. And found it quite a challenge. And on those people who were doing biosciences and not doing double maths and physics as their main A-levels and things were, if you're doing the bioscience side, biology and chemistry and things like I did, then you had to have extra maths lessons to bring you up to the level of the maths you were required to have in physics, which was even more agonising in some respects. But there we are. Yes. I was thinking about demarcation disputes, repairing bits and pieces, and it can be quite devastating sometimes. I remember we were very lucky because we installed sort of CT scanners in our workplace, and we're part of justice, so we've got nothing to do with health, but some of my colleagues in other states that should remain nameless had all kinds of problems when they started putting CT scanners into their sort of mortuary areas, where they found that if they let their technical staff run the CT scanners, the hospital staff, many kilometres away, the radiographers would get upset and go on strike in the hospital because they're all part of the health department, and this caused terrible problems. So yes, demarcation disputes can be fascinating from time to time. But yes, I've repaired odd bits and pieces like that, which I wasn't supposed to. There's something to be said for little gas soldering irons. You can whiz in and quickly fire them up and do a very quick repair job and move on, and no one's any the wiser, which is a good way of doing it. Yes, when you were talking about Martinique, yes, of course, that's where the Death in Paradise, the TV show, is actually filmed. I think which is the sort of locked room mystery type cases in the way they write them, and they're quite fun. And so it's obviously a very, very beautiful scenery and surroundings there. So yeah, very, very nice indeed. Back to you then, Chris. VK3AML and the group VK3ECG.
Yeah, by the way, Dave, just a quick question before we move on. I recently had to do a rapid antigen test before taking Prue into hospital. We both had to, as a prerequisite for her being admitted. And they supplied an RAT test with a UV torch. And you would do the test, and to see the lines on the paper inside the little tester, you had to shine the UV torch onto the paper, and the lines showed up glowing red. Do you know anything about that? VK, just back to you for a minute.
No, I haven't seen any of those kits. I've had about 4 or 5 different types of kits that I've picked up at various times to use. None of them involve that. They've used light indicators. I mean, certainly they used to use UV lights to pick up the light. I suppose it depends on what the dye reaction on the strip is and whether it's a UV sensitive one or a light one. Could you see the lines in normal light as well, or were they only visible on the UV?
only visible in UV, and they glowed a sort of a red colour.
Yeah, no, I've not come across those. I mean, I'm sure there's a whole variety of ones, different ones around. I'm sure, but and certainly that is with those sort of strip type tests. UV is used for some of them. It depends on the particular binding chemicals they're using to create the line as to whether they're optically coloured or whether they're a UV. Seems a rather expensive way to go about it, though, if they're providing a light source like that.
It's only a little thing. It's like a penlight torch, except it has a LED in the front that's fairly high power and blue. It's quite amusing to go through our pantry and shine it round and see all the we've got some very old uranium glass plates and such from the 1930s, and the colours those things light up when the UV hits them is really a surprise. But look, we'll come back to you on that. I know that they use UV in forensic work. I believe if they're carnal knowledge cases or whatever, that the sperm spattered around a scene can be brought up by UV. Ugh. That's one side of forensics I wouldn't like to touch. Around to you, Peter, VK3ACZ and group, VK3... Sorry about that, 3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML on the group, VK3ACZ. And Dr. Dave, thank you for letting me know about Death in Paradise, a show I've not actually watched right through. I'm aware of it. I've seen little snippets of it and previews. I might have to start watching it just to see what I can glean from it. All good there. Chris, I love a good conspiracy theory as much as the next person. I mean, sometimes there's just not enough stuff around, not enough material to laugh at. I became aware of one only this week, and I'm about 20 years too late with this one. Wonder if you've heard of John Titor, that's Tango India Tango Oscar Radio. This particular fellow claimed to have come back in time to the 70s or whatever it was to get a computer program to take Back to the Future because it had been corrupted in the future. And there was quite a lengthy story about it. He described and drew diagrams of the time machine that allowed him to travel back in time. I think to save any more bother about it all, his predictions of what was going to happen in the future, and I mean around about 2001, I believe, he said something about by 2015 there'd be a third world war. Yeah, good on you. I note, though, that some of the people that are desperate to believe this say that, that was only one of the many alternate universes, and that he could have, just by being back here, he changed the future. So, yeah, you can have two by the way with all that. I think it's pretty roundly dismissed as a crazy internet hoax. What a surprise. But anyway, I'm just surprised that I never heard of this one. Has one who's been so fascinated with time travel tried desperately to understand general relativity, which, as you will be aware, even with a rudimentary understanding like I've got, that it allows for travel. We just don't know how it's going to have. Well, travel to the future, of course, is by getting power from who knows where to travel close to the speed of light, etc., etc. But anyway, it was a conspiracy theory. I've dropped the ball, obviously. I didn't get to hear about that one. I suppose there's only so many theories you can hear in one day. And good of you to shared the video with us about the ionosphere and all that. We really should have been taking notes because I missed some of it, like what frequencies begin to exit the ionosphere rather than be reflected back or absorbed. But anyway, back to you, Chris. VK3AML, VK3ACZ.
VK3ACZ and group VK3AML. Yeah, well, there have been all sorts of, biblical people into prophecy, seeing the future, and somehow if stories are couched in a very distant period in the past, they, for a lot of people, become more believable. like a man living inside a whale, or like all mankind being descended from a single man and woman created by God, and a woman being created from man's rib or whatever. John Titor, interesting, going back to the 1970s. I'd like to go back to about 1950 and offer Putin's father a condom. Mind you, it would probably mean that I would cease to exist, because the whole history of the world would change. But, you know, if only we could go back to the Hitler family and offer his father a condom at the right time. God. The Nostradamus predictions also were the source of all sorts of theorising. I remember when they were at their height of popularity in the 1980s. Somebody must have published a book and other people leapt on the bandwagon. These days, with social media, people are coming up with conspiracy ideas which would have died in the bum in the old days, where most people got their information from printed media, which at least has to go through some sort of an editorial process before it gets to the printed page because of the cost of doing so. But now any bum with the wildest, most outlandish scheme can get in touch with millions of people instantaneously on internet, and some bum on the other side of the world will have come up with the same conspiracy, and suddenly it avalanches. The internet is very much a two-edged sword. Some people believe everything that they read on the internet. They don't have any sense of ranking of the weight of data by whether it's had expert peer review. They don't understand the system of expert peer review that goes into publications like Nature, like The Lancet, like any number of science publications. And by the way, just looking at Robert Varner from New Jersey's latest typing on there, he says, "I used to tutor math at a local college and students told me I taught it better than the professor." Well, judging from some professors I've met, Robert, I'm not at all surprised. But I can't really say much against maths people. I have a brother-in-law who was a mathematician who worked at Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, for the better part of 20 years, and is now working at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute, helping them with the mathematical side of DNA mapping, specifically with relation to tracing people who may have a genetic predisposition to certain types of cancers that can be fairly easily treated. Genetically related cancers, I believe there is a genetic component to breast cancer and to cancer of the thyroid, and they may be able to predict from the DNA more accurately who is likely to come down with that stuff to do some preventive medicine, much better than cutting stuff out after the fact. So I think it's round now to VK3AML, our newsagent destroyer up on the hill. By the way, John, you might like to, before I had a chance, was there a story there, VK3AML, VK3AML?
Yes, 3AML, VK3GG. Well, Nigel rang up and wanted me to record something, so I had to rush home to set the thing to record. So I had limited time. That was really why I left suddenly. What time does that meeting start? Is it 8 or is it 7:30? I tried to look that up on one of the websites. It was very unclear. Yes, well, the conspiracy theories on the net and people believing things with that question because it's on the net. Well, I certainly do remember a lot of people who used to believe things must be true, and they were right because they were on VK3 Awful Wireless. So I guess it's just an extension of that there. Yes, QDH was sort of on top of a hill, not far from the TV translator tower and a historical lookout. And as a result, it does actually get good coverage. You can work simplex from here to right as you go around the corner on the highway into Kyneton of Mount Macedon. Then you lose it on Mount Macedon because it ends up in the way. Or you can get it. You can talk simplex on 2 metres to someone in a car most of the way to Ballarat. So it certainly does work quite well. Anyway, VK3AML, VK3EGG.
Yes, it's certainly an excellent location you've got there. I think the only way you could improve on it, John, would be to go to One Tree Hill or someplace like that that's a fair way from the television transmitters on Mount Dandenong and get the height there. There are some freehold houses up there. I don't know how much you pay to be on One Tree Hill. I imagine it's a fair bit. The other trade-off on being up there is that there are forests on all sides that terminate at the bottom in suburban bush, and all it requires is one match and it goes up the hill. And I think Ferny Creek has been declared the most fire unsafe place in Victoria. Back about 25 years ago there were a couple of deaths in a house up there. Not too many escape routes, and coming down on the series of Devil's Elbows is probably not viable during a fire. You'd run into the fire rather than getting away from it. Yeah, Dave, so the usage of ultraviolet light for forensics, that'd be an interesting one. And having this torch, this little UV torch, I assume that UV torches now are quite cheap to produce because basically the UV light-emitting diode, typically a high current one that will take 500 milliamps, maybe an amp, it is simply a white LED without any of the phosphor. VK3ECG in the group. So some expertise on the usage of UV in forensic work, VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML in the group, VK3ECG. No, absolutely right. And LEDs have completely revolutionised the sort of multi-light sources. The famous thing that sort of emerged, which I'm trying to remember when it came out, would have been the 60s, I suppose, was the polylight, which I think is commercial, but it was basically a way of getting sort of using filters to develop very specific wavelengths. And I can't remember if this was used for originally, some sort of crystal thing, I think, but it soon became realised that it was useful for a whole variety of other things. And you're absolutely right. It's certainly you do use UV light sources for looking around at various objects for seminal material. That certainly has been used a lot and is still available and can be used as a screening type sort of area for where you take your samples from. And that still happens. There are some things that have particular dyes put in them that will fluoresce as indicators. So, for example, some of the riot control sprays, CS and capsaicin and pepper spray and things like that, they actually have some fluorescent dyes in them, so that you can actually see where the spray has gone on to people and things like that, so you can know where to sample the right thing. So yeah, there's a whole variety of those sort of things, and of course a lot of the test instruments are effectively use UV detectors and things like that for drug analyzers, and that's really what the RATS test is. It's just the indicator it's happened to be using is fluorescent rather than an optical dye. Can't remember. I mean, perhaps some of the earlier ones it was easier to produce those sort of kits, and the optical ones came later. I don't know. Certainly, I've never used one. But I know they're around, and I would have thought having those little torches would be quite fun to look around and on odd things in your home. There are a whole variety of things. I mean, even you know, the sort of whitening washing detergents have mild fluorescent sort of substances in them, so that in UV things look whiter than white. And you know, if you can remember those discos or whatever, where people all had the UV lights, and you could tell who had their shirts washed in, you know, some of the newer biological washing powders that had all these things in it. It's a bit like some of the early toothpaste, which had a slight red dye in them, so that your gums would look red, so that your teeth would look whiter. Fascinating stuff. VK3AML group, VK3ECG.
Gosh, Dave, you're a fund of fascinating information. I would never have thought of darkening the gums to make your teeth look whiter. What a cunning way of going about things. Oh dear. But yes, you're right. If these headphones would allow me to get into the kitchen, I'd bring the little torch in and just switch the lights off in the room and see if I can make anything glow in here. The most surprising stuff does glow. Certain types of paper must have sizing in it that glows. Uranium glass, as I said. We have some carnival glass from the 1930s, sort of the orange with the oily sort of sheen on it, you know, the rainbow colours. My mother used to say that was the cheapest sort of crockery you could buy from Coles back in the 30s, usually carnival glass. Now it's highly collectible, but that glows, or at least some of it does. Any of that glass that's slightly greenish for some strange reason glows as well. Your teeth do, at least mine do. Looks very strange, but I imagine you wouldn't like to be exposed to that for too long. There was discos I went to in the 80s where they would run, they looked like fluorescent lamps without any phosphor. But I imagine it would have been some special sort of glass that they were made of that let the UV through. You could kind of, in the visual range, you could see that the very dull violet discharge through the mercury vapour inside the fluorescent tube, and this would make your shirt look like it was lighting the room up. Cotton shirts particularly. Yeah, interesting. Back in the 60s, when the museum in Swanston Street used to be called the Institute of Applied Arts and Sciences, in McCoy Hall at the back near Russell Street, there was a rampart around the room, a sort of a balcony, gallery is the right word. And in part of that gallery they used to have a display of fluorescent rocks. You could press a light and see the rocks under normal visual light, and they'd be usually grey or some very muted colour. And then you'd take your finger off that button and press the UV button. The UV light would come on, and these rocks would glow red and blue and green, and fascinating. But of course, museums being the museum, rather than continue something that everybody wanted to see, they show us something that nobody wants to see. Anyway, around to VK3ACZ. You might actually remember that display, Peter, the glowing rocks display at the museum. VK3ACZ, VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ. No, only very, very vaguely, I think, Chris. But something Dave said that rang bells with me is the UV thing in the washing powders. I remember speaking to a mad keen deer hunter who said that for a long time he wore his camouflage clothing, believing he was able to sneak or prowl around in the semi-darkness or whatever, and it turns out that because deer can see in UV, he was actually glowing like a blue light, therefore alerting the deer to his presence because he was using your standard, Omo or whatever it was, washing powder. So there you go. And speaking of white teeth, I don't know if you saw Shane Warne's interview on with Lee Sales, replayed this week from 2019. It was hard not to stare at those teeth that were way too white to look natural. They had a real porcelain look about them too, but I guess there was a little bit of vanity, because wasn't he into the hair restoring stuff as well? And none of that to rain on Shane's parade. I was so sorry to hear the news. Just commenting on those couple of things there. I had a good laugh at what you suggested Putin's father should have done. I don't think it's too hard to agree with you on that one, but I still managed a bit of a chuckle about it. And maths teachers, oh yeah, going back and over it too. I, in Form 2, still remember, it didn't do me any great harm, I think, because it was so natural, but my female maths teacher slapped me across the side of the face with the back of her hand for getting a maths question wrong. So I hate to think what she would have done if she knew what these pubescent boys were, boys stuck in the middle of puberty were saying about her. I remember things like that she definitely didn't have a cherry because some boys could tell by the way she walked. Yeah, funny, but only boys in the middle of puberty could come up with gold like that. But even so, it sounds like it was rather standard to mete out that sort of punishment. And I only wish when I was doing maths, which I did not develop a great love for, unfortunately, that somebody had actually said, okay, you're learning logarithms today because you're going to use it in such and such through the rest of your working or living life. That was never done. We were given stuff that we had to learn, but no explanation whatsoever. And as we all know, we can learn anything that we're interested in and have a love for. Anything else, talent that we're born with might be needed to get us through. Anyway, enough of that. Chris, I'm just wondering, question for you, are you any closer to getting yourself on HF with this SDR radio? I'm just wondering, you haven't mentioned anything about that for a while there now. Back to you, VK3AML, VK3ACZ.
Well, I'd certainly like to come on, but Prue's, the amount of time I'm having to spend on Prue's situation with recovering from the back operation, everything falls to me. Preparation of meals, shopping. I'm within walking distance of the local shop, Burwood 1, about, I suppose, 6 or 7 blocks away, with a little wheeling trolley, and I can bring back in that up to 2 3-litre milk bottles plus about half a week's supplies for the two of us, having to do a lot of those trips back and forth. I don't have a car licence, never have, so the car's not an option, and I don't like relying on other people when I can do it myself. I can get the trolley's quite light to pull, and then helping Prue, for example, in the shower, in case she loses balance, I have to sit and watch. Not that I find that a trial with my wife, she's quite shapely, but we've been married for nearly 30 years, so we're used to each other's goods and bad points with the body, but she feels insecure in the shower, so I have to sit with her with that. So it takes quite a bit of time for both of us, and one of the hardest things the last few days is because of the amount of pain that Prue's been in. She's had disturbed sleep during the night, and of course me sleeping next to her, I've had disturbed sleep during the night, so our biological clocks are all out of kilter. I'm waking up at times like 3 in the morning and finding it impossible to get back to sleep without getting up and doing a bit of Facebook for a couple of hours or whatever, or calling CQ on VHF, UHF in Melbourne to find out that somebody's there. I'm certainly enthusiastic to get on HF. I've got the second mast ready to go on the front of the house to complete the 80-metre dipole. All of the fittings necessary, the pulley, all of the wire I need measured to length for the necessary dipoles and feed line, and the dog bone insulators even. But I've been reluctant to spend a great deal or to spend a lot of time on the project until such time as I have a lot of time to concentrate on it. And things are changing a lot in the international exchange rate department, largely because of the instability of Russia with the embargoes being put upon it. The Russian ruble, last time I looked, was worth about 1/10 of what it was in January. It has dropped to 0.7 of a US cent. What with that and payment systems based in America and ATMs based in America all refusing to work in Russia, imagine what that is doing, not so much to the mega-rich oligarchs that run it or to Putin, but to the average poor Russian bastard on the street. So that's having an effect, and further instability caused by an expected hike in petrol prices for us, which will have an effect on the transport of goods between states, and therefore food prices will probably rise. So heaven knows where we'll be in terms of exchange rate by the time I have time to apply myself to that, but I'm hoping that by mid-year Prue will be sufficiently recovered that I won't be quite so tied up. I know that she's expected to be back driving within 6 to 8 weeks, which will relieve me of a lot of problems. But thank God she won't be a paraplegic, which was the alternative because of the pressure on the spinal cord. That is fixed, and we're sort of genuflecting quite a bit as a result of that. Van Dan Escobar on our text chat says that he was just watching a video on Russian communication, and a lot's going on in the 7933 to 8 megahertz area. I know that I've been watching the Russian buzzer on 4625, and that has been, over the last week, very heavily interfered with broadband white noise just in the 3 kilohertz band on top of the Russian buzzer on 4625. If you look at any WebSDR in Eastern Europe, including those in Germany, there's a particularly good one, particularly sensitive and well-placed one in the Black Forest in Bavaria, where you can look at this. You can actually see the white noise on the waterfall display over the top of the Russian buzzer, which I believe is either military comms by the Russians or some sort of Russian equivalent of a GPS system. Not sure which. Would anybody know, really? And Robert Varner in New Jersey says that in Franklin, New Jersey, there's a famous glowing rock museum, which apparently is based on that ultraviolet light effect. So we move on to, I think, is it VK3GG again? John, VK3AML.
Yes, 3AML, VK3GG returning, yes, fine on all that, yes, yes, the various rocks that act as different coloured phosphors under UV light, all quite interesting, yes, I remember seeing things like that. Yes, now as for the Russian crisis, which seems to be getting worse, well, normally I put in, because it's a diesel car, I don't want to run out of fuel, because then you've got to get under the bonnet and operate this pump thing to reprime the injectors and the compression pump or whatever it is, the injector pump I mean. So I always fill the car up to full, and then that's what I've done, and then I use it down to a certain level over a fortnight. Now that used to cost me $40 for the fortnight to fill it back up to full each fortnight. Well, it costs over $100. So I haven't been bothering to go out very much now because that's almost unaffordable on the pension given the other expenses. So yeah, that's one of the things. And that of course is a diesel car that costs half the price to run that an equivalent 6-cylinder Commodore on petrol would cost. So I'm glad I'm not still driving a petrol 6-cylinder Commodore, because that would be $200 just for the local shopping and driving around and not going tremendously far. So this Russian war has certainly had quite an impact. Yes, there's some multinational tycoon somewhere that wants to kill Putin. Well, I don't know. I hope he succeeds with the trouble he's caused. Perhaps there'll be like a Nuremberg trial, and they'll go and get Putin and all the his cronies and do like what they did after World War II to all the Third Reich people and such like. Actually, there's been an interesting documentary on SBS which was replayed, I forget how many times it's been on, not that long ago, about that. I think it was called The Biggest Murder Trial in the World or something, the film was called, but it was all quite interesting there. Yes, well, I think they certainly need to lift their game with things like maths teachers, because most of the maths teachers you come across in school, they don't actually know maths all that well. I mean, when my mother was a teacher, she was mainly a language teacher, but she got put in to teach maths. Now, she couldn't understand any of the maths that you would find in the RSGB or the ARRL, which isn't very hard maths, yet she was teaching maths up to sixth form. So that just gives you an indication of the standard of maths teachers that we have in Australia. Now, I saw a documentary about the Scandinavian countries. Now, to be a teacher over there, it's about like learning to be an A380 captain or something. And they have regular retraining things, just like the airline pilots do. I mean, by being a badly trained teacher, you can hurt just as many people as you can by being a badly trained pilot. So they take it really seriously, and they have an education system with no homework, and it runs rings around our education system here, and the results they get is far better than what we get here. So that's all quite interesting.
Yeah, VK3GG, VK3AML. I know that from an educational point of view, I think Finland and Sweden are held up as being exemplars. And most of my Finnish friends, I have a few on Facebook, are bilingual. They've been taught English in schools so that they can trade or deal with English-speaking countries easily. And so they're bilingual from about the age of 7. And I believe that Finnish is a very difficult language to learn, so in some ways English is easier. Certainly my Finnish friends speak it impeccably. Incidentally, my wife was descended from Finns. The Hacklin family was my wife's Finnish family. Finns and Welsh people. A Finnish sailor who jumped ship in Adelaide, it is said because he couldn't stand 3 months of darkness each year. Preferred Adelaide's climate. Even though I consider it to be the most boring Australian city. I hope nobody in Adelaide is watching this here. I'm just looking down the list for a VK5 and can't find any, thank God. We better start winding up soon because it is almost 20 to 1 a.m. and I should see how Prue is. She went to bed early tonight, which has given me a bit of freedom to do this thing on Saturdays, and I'll be doing it again next Saturday, I hope. While I'm housebound, of course, this makes this a little bit easier to do. So VK3CG, possibly for a final, Dave. Very nice to have you back. Lovely to speak to you again, and I hope we'll come across you next week. VK3CG and group VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML and group VK3CG. Yes, fine there. Yes, I should be wrapping it up now. And I was just looking down my little list on my notepad here, the various things that I might have commented on but didn't. Some reference to, oh yes, the fluorescent clothing and hunters and so on, which reminds me of just the vague thing. I remember someone telling me that you might as well go hunting deer with an orange fluoro vest, because deer have very poor red, orange vision. They see it all in greys, I think. They've got lots of rods but not many cones in their eyes, so they don't see colours very well. And but of course the important thing there is the other hunters can see you, so you don't tend to shoot each other, which unfortunately does happen from time to time. And the other thing is that the actual lamp, the UV lamp that was sort of used on the sort of medical and forensic thing, was called the Woods lamp. I'm sure it must have been produced by somebody called Mr. Woods, but I must look that up one day to find out who Woods was in relation to the Woods lamp. What else? Ah, yes, predictions in Nostradamus. I've written cherry jam next to it. The only thing he got right was a good recipe for cherry jam. I think that was on a QI or something. But anyway, and that's probably the last of the little notes I think I had. Oh yes, just going back to the 75 metre thing, that's the other one I had, was the reference to Canberra. I understand that they did use high power audio to actually shout at people and with some noise, and that was apparently misinterpreted. They were using some sort of other radiation, electromagnetic radiation, but apparently it was just audio. If you shout loud enough at people long enough, they'll go away. I think it may have been the philosophy. I do notice that there's quite a lot of that going on. I mean, a lot of the music that's played in sort of car parks. I don't know if you go to some of the big shopping centre car parks, on the roof space, they're playing classical music. Apparently this drives the kids who might otherwise gather there to the extent that they don't want to gather there. And apparently Mozart is the best for getting rid of youths. I think it's rather a shame, actually. But on that note, I shall call it a day and wish everyone 73s, and hope to catch up next weekend. So, VK3AML in the group, VK3ECG going off and clear.
No worries, Dave. Thank you for coming up, and nice to have you back. I should mention the only contact I've had very briefly with Steve 3SL is he called in for about 5 minutes just at the front door to drop in some hot cross buns to us as a bit of a nice gesture when he was on the way to, I think, the sports ground where some of his kids were playing. And COVID has played havoc with his family of 5 children. You can imagine he and his wife holding down jobs in the educational area and then having 5 children, and then one after the other. Apparently they came down with COVID, so that would cause all sorts of problems in terms of earning a living, in terms of mixing with other people. He's had a horrendous year. Not that ours has been much better. And LRADs, yes, I must read more about them, and I've seen the photographs of them. Van Dan Escobar says that he saw the photographs of the LRADs, and what with those and these rumours of microwave death rays, it just indicates the sort of people who are, frankly, the anti-vax mob. I have yet to meet one that I would call science-trained, and the few that claim to be are science-trained in pseudosciences, and in that I would include naturopathy. Some forms of naturopathy are taught in universities and are quite viable. Others tend to be taught by RTOs, registered training organisations, and they really are New Age woo. And a lot of New Agers are into all these conspiracy theories, and I never cease to be amazed. Oh, you better stop that ham radio. You're irradiating my family next door. We'll have 2-headed children next time me missus gets pregnant. I mean, God, some of this shit. Pardon my French. Anyway, over to Peter, VK3ACZ, for a final VK3AML.
VK3AML in the quickly diminishing group, VK3ACZ. And yeah, I won't touch the new agey stuff at all. But yeah, Dave mentioned another thing again that's rather sad. You know, using classical music to keep young dirtbags from loitering at certain locations is all pretty sad. What does it say about the youth then? Enough of that. The Ukraine situation, yeah, well, I've been through my logbook to see all the Ukraine amateur radio operators I worked, and other than one that was in the capital, the others were in locations that Russia has already walked through. So I look at their entries in my logbook and can just wonder. I can just wonder. It's all pretty terrible. And yes, I saw fuel finally go over the $2 a litre today. I hadn't. The doom and gloom had been going for nearly 2 weeks now, I think, but I actually saw it at the advertised on the service station. So I do remember many years ago seeing that bumper sticker that said the car is paid for, but the fuel is on hire purchase. And as I think I said on another net earlier in the week, Chris, the prophecy has been fulfilled. It's come true. We will be taking out bank loans for our fuel. And there you go. And yes, also Roger, on what Dave said about hunters being able to use the blaze orange material so hunters can see each other. It beggars belief that hunters can actually shoot each other. It really does. Just utterly amazing that they could shoot at something moving in the bush that's not been properly identified. But there you go. No more need be said about that. Chris, thank you again for a fantastic broadcast. Look forward to it every week, and you never disappoint. You've always got some good stuff in there, and keep doing it. You're appreciated. And good to have you back, Dave. John, if you're still listening. To everybody else, have a great week. Look forward to doing it all again next week, Chris. Not sure what I think was my favourite of the night. It won't be the guy saying he needs to take a dump, even though, as I said before, I'm sure he actually was taking one but while he was on air. But there you go. Cheers and a good night. 7-3 Chris, VK3AML, VK3ACZ.
Thanks a lot, Peter, and I must arrange with you sometime during this week, next week perhaps, doing a video with you of your portable operations. If I was you, I'd be finding 2 trees up in the state forest, the appropriate distance apart for an 80-metre dipole if you're doing night operation, and getting some tennis ball launchers or something with some ropes over suitable branches with a dipole up permanently that you simply hook into every time you go into that part of the bush. Anyway, just a thought. And I think you're tying the ribbons, John, VK3GG. To tie the ribbons, VK3 Alpha Mike Lima.
Yes, 3AML, VK3 EGG, yes, fine all that. That's what I was going to comment on. I did finally tune in through the mobile phone and I saw the power supply. Yes, it's actually mine's a Dick Smith D3800. Now the current meter goes up to I think it's 30 amps or something from memory, but if you draw more than 15 amps out of it continuously, it'll play up. And the amplifier I've got here now, if you turn it to its high power position, it draws more than that, and the power supply doesn't like it. So whereas this one draws about, whereas how it's set now, it draws about 15 amps, which is about the safe limit for those supplies from experience if it's going to be continuous for crossbands and things. I know I can draw more current out of it for a short time, but I can't for a great length of time. Yes, so yes, well, if the petrol gets and diesel gets too expensive, perhaps I might have to drag out the old push bike with a lawnmower engine on it. I know those things are illegal, but I got away with riding one of those for a long time when I was younger, just to make it affordable to go and do the shopping. But anyway, so we say 7.3s and all that, and I'll put it by to whoever else it is to say anything, and VK3GG will be off and clear and just listening.
No worries, John. Do we have any breakers before we close? VK3AML, standing by. No, they're all in bed. Anyway, just thanking Van Dan Escobar, one of our regulars on the text chat, Mick. I don't know whether that's Metal Mick that I knew on CB years ago. L2 repeats. He says the New Zealanders were smarter. They broke up protests outside New Zealand Parliament by playing Barry Manilow. I remember hearing a story years ago about Spike Milligan, who hated piped music. And one time Spike Milligan famously was in Harrods or something similar and going up in the lift, and they started playing this soppy stuff. He got stuck between floors and they were playing it for about 5 minutes before finally he just did his block and literally ripped the loudspeaker off the lift wall, stamped on it. There have been occasions I felt like doing something similar. The demonstrators who are, I'm reading what L2 repeats says, angry at COVID-19 vaccine mandates. Well, I have friends who are scientists, I have friends who are GPs. I take their advice, not the advice of... If I want advice on vaccines, I take it from qualified people, not from farmers, not from truckies, not from farm labourers, not from building specialists, nor even from psychologists. I take my advice from GPs or people who've been through medical training. I'm afraid that I'm very much in favour of a vaccine mandate if it is the only way to combat something that's potentially lethal. And I'm very glad to have had my 3 shots. And with that, I'll wish everybody a very good night. And thank all the people on the text chat. Well, who else was there? Jared Quinn, he came in a little bit late. You'll be able to see it on replay anyway, as long as I haven't played anything that's copyright, and I don't think I have. Ponderoof, nice to see you. Jeff Sylvester, g'day Jeff. Nice that you were able to pop your face in there. I'll read in closely the things that you say. Chris Baird, nice to see you back again. And I think that's it. Terry Sims, Terry, as always, we speak constantly on text on Facebook. All the best, people. Catch you next week, hopefully 9:30 p.m. Saturday on Livestream, and again on 147.475. As a first priority, rather than making this crossband, I'm looking into ways and means of running Skype or some similar thing on this computer to allow me to bring in people who are not on the ham band or within reach of my transmissions. It would have been fascinating to have some input from our friend Robert Varner in New Jersey. VK3 Alpha Mike Lima now going clear on 147.475.
You're right, we say morning. That's the other thing I forgot to say. Yes, those things they claim were used to irradiate protesters. I believe there is such a thing. It's called a directed energy weapon. And I think some of them put out pulses of 90 gigs. But how far that would go and actually do something to someone, I don't know.
I think it's highly unlikely in view of OH&S rules that police would use that indiscriminately, particularly in Australia. Anyway, all the best. VK3AML clear.
And we say morning.
And also thank you to the people on the stream. Always a pleasure. As a retired person who's been into broadcasting, this gives me a focus each week for thinking about things that can keep me mentally alert at 68. I've just turned 68 this week, as a matter of fact. No congratulations required, more commiserations. But it's to me it's interesting to do the research and to dig up stuff that kind of relates, like that Bureau of Standards film on scatter radar, which obviously led into the development of HAARP. Thank you very much, people, and I'll wish you a very good night.